The grandfather paradox. Imagine you invent a time machine. The first thing you decide to do? Travel back in time to prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. At first, it seems like a simple action. If your grandfather never meets your grandmother, one of your parents will never be born. And if one of your parents never exists, then you can't exist either. But if you were never born, then you could never have traveled back in time in the first place. So, what happens? If your plan succeeds, you erase yourself from existence, meaning you never went back in time to change history. But if you never went back in time, then history should remain unchanged, which means you do exist and can travel back in time to change it again. Just like that, you're trapped in an endless loop of contradiction. This paradox is one of the most famous problems in time travel theory, raising deep questions about causality and free will. It suggests that if time travel to the past were possible, there would have to be some mechanism preventing paradoxes from happening, whether through parallel universes, self-correcting timelines, or an unseen force that stops actions that could break history. The grandfather paradox isn't just science fiction. It's a real philosophical and scientific puzzle that challenges our understanding of time and reality. If the past can be changed, can the future ever be certain? Or is time itself an unchangeable force, locked in a loop where paradoxes are simply impossible? I'd love to invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's incredible to think about how we're all connected through these stories and ideas. Consider to subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations. The liar paradox. Imagine someone walks up to you and says, "I am lying." At first, it seems like a straightforward statement, but the moment you try to analyze whether it's true or false, you get stuck in an endless loop. If the person is telling the truth, then they are lying, which means their statement must be false. But if their statement is false, then they must be telling the truth. And just like that, the statement contradicts itself, making it impossible to classify as either true or false. This paradox has puzzled philosophers and logicians for over 2,000 years. It was first documented by the Greek philosopher Eubulides in the 4th century BCE. He used it to demonstrate the limitations of human logic, showing that language can create statements that defy traditional rules of reasoning. Our classical understanding of logic says that a statement must be either true or false. There is no in-between. But the liar paradox challenges this principle. It presents a statement that does not fit neatly into either category, revealing a fundamental flaw in how we define truth. Beyond philosophy, the liar paradox has real-world implications. In computer science, for example, systems are designed to process logical statements. But what happens when a program encounters a contradiction like this? Some systems might enter an infinite loop, unable to resolve the statement. This paradox also plays a role in artificial intelligence, where machines must interpret and respond to human language accurately. Even in everyday life, we often encounter situations that feel paradoxical. Politicians, for instance, sometimes make statements that contradict themselves, leaving people confused about what is actually true. The liar paradox serves as a reminder that not everything we hear can be easily classified as right or wrong. So, is the statement "I am lying" true or false? The paradox remains unsolved, and perhaps it always will. The deeper question it raises is whether truth itself is absolute, or whether some truths exist in a gray area beyond our logical grasp. The barber paradox. Imagine a small town where there is only one barber. A sign outside his shop reads, "I shave all men who do not shave themselves, and only those men." At first, this seems like a clear rule. But then someone asks, who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he must not shave himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must shave himself. Just like that, we are caught in an endless contradiction, an unsolvable loop where both possibilities cancel each other out. This paradox was introduced by the mathematician Bertrand Russell in 1918 to highlight problems in logic and set theory. It shows how self-referential rules can create contradictions, making certain logical systems unreliable. Beyond philosophy, the barber paradox has real-world applications. In computer programming, similar contradictions can cause systems to crash when they encounter conflicting rules. In law and ethics, we see versions of this paradox when rules contradict themselves, leaving no clear solution. So, does the barber shave himself or not? The answer is that the town described in the paradox cannot logically exist. It is an imaginary scenario that exposes flaws in certain systems of reasoning, showing us that sometimes the way a question is framed is the problem itself. The ship of Theseus. Imagine an ancient ship displayed in a museum, the legendary ship of Theseus. Over time, its wooden planks rot and are gradually replaced one by one until not a single original plank remains. At this point, is it still the same ship? Now let's take it further. Suppose someone gathers all the discarded planks and rebuilds the original ship elsewhere. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The one that was gradually restored or the one reconstructed from the original parts? This paradox, first documented by the philosopher Plutarch, challenges our understanding of identity. It forces us to ask, at what point does something stop being itself? This question isn't just about ships. It applies to people too. Every cell in your body is replaced over time. The person you were 10 years ago is biologically different from who you are today. Are you still the same person? The paradox extends to law, ownership, and even artificial intelligence. If you replace every part of a machine, does it remain the same device? If a person's mind is uploaded into a computer, is the digital copy truly them? The ship of Theseus teaches us that identity is more than just physical components. Perhaps what makes something itself is not its parts, but its continuity and essence over time. So, is the ship of Theseus the same ship? The answer depends on how we define identity itself. The Sorite's paradox. Imagine you have a pile of sand. If you remove a single grain, it's still a pile. Remove another grain, and it's still a pile. But what happens if you keep going? At what exact point does the pile stop being a pile? This is the Sorite's paradox, also known as the paradox of the heap. It challenges our understanding of vague concepts, things that don't have clear-cut boundaries. Let's consider another example. Imagine a man with a full head of hair. If he loses one strand, he's still not bald. If he loses another, nothing changes. But if you keep removing hair, at some point, he becomes bald. But when exactly? Was it after losing 1,000 hairs? 10,000? The problem with this paradox is that many concepts in language and everyday life, like heap, bald, tall, rich, and old, are based on vague definitions. There is no precise point where something definitively changes from one category to another. Philosophers have debated this paradox for centuries. Some argue that we should accept fuzzy logic, where things exist on a spectrum rather than in black and white categories. Instead of saying someone is either rich or poor, we could say they exist on a scale of wealth. Instead of saying someone is young or old, we could recognize a gradual transition over time. But this creates new problems. If everything exists on a spectrum, when do definitions actually matter? If we can't define when a pile becomes not a pile, can we define when a person is guilty or innocent in court? Or when a person is alive or dead in medical decisions? The Sorite's paradox shows us that many things in life don't have clear boundaries, yet we rely on language to draw those boundaries anyway. It reminds us that many of our everyday concepts, money, status, beauty, intelligence, are fluid and constantly shifting. So, how many grains of sand does it take to make a heap? The answer isn't clear. And maybe, just maybe, it never was. The unexpected. Hanging paradox. Imagine a judge sentences a prisoner to death but gives him one final twist. He will be hanged at noon on a weekday, but the exact day will be a surprise. The prisoner thinks carefully. If the execution happens on Friday, he will see it coming, because Thursday will have passed without it happening. So Friday must be impossible. Now, if Friday is ruled out, then Thursday must also be impossible, because by the end of Wednesday, he would know it must be on Thursday. But if Thursday is eliminated, The same logic applies to Wednesday, then Tuesday, and finally Monday. By this reasoning, the prisoner concludes that the execution can never happen as a surprise. He feels safe. Then, on Wednesday at noon, the executioner arrives. The prisoner is completely shocked. The execution was a surprise after all. This paradox reveals a flaw in how we reason about the future. The prisoner assumes that if he can logically eliminate all options, then nothing can happen. But reality doesn't work that way. Sometimes our expectations trap us in a false sense of certainty, only for reality to surprise us anyway. This paradox also applies to logic puzzles, probability, and even real-life situations. Think about financial crashes, political events, or personal setbacks. People often convince themselves that something can't happen, only for it to unfold when they least expect it. So, was the prisoner wrong to believe he was safe? Or was the paradox designed to ensure that no matter what he believed, he would always be wrong? The infinite hotel paradox. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, all of which are occupied. One night, a traveler arrives and asks for a room. The hotel manager, instead of turning them away, simply shifts every guest one room over. The person in room 1 moves to room 2. The person in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. Just like that, room 1 is now available. Even though the hotel was full, it still had space for more guests. Now what if an infinite number of guests arrive? The manager simply tells each guest to move to the room twice their current room number. Room 1 moves to room 2. Room 2 moves to room 4. Room 3 moves to room 6. Now all odd-numbered rooms are vacant, leaving infinite space for new guests. This is Hilbert's infinite hotel paradox, a thought experiment that shows how infinity doesn't behave the way we expect. In normal logic, if something is full, it cannot take more. But with infinity, there is always room for more. This paradox is more than just a mathematical curiosity. It challenges how we think about space, time, and the universe itself. If infinity exists, does it mean that reality itself has no limits? And if infinity has paradoxes, can we ever truly grasp its nature? Achilles and the tortoise. Imagine a race between the Greek hero Achilles, the fastest runner in the world, and a slow-moving tortoise. To be fair, Achilles gives the tortoise a head start of 10 meters. When Achilles starts running, he quickly reaches the spot where the tortoise began. But by that time, the tortoise has moved forward a little bit. Achilles then reaches that new position, but by then, the tortoise has moved forward again. No matter how fast Achilles runs, he will always have some distance left to cover. In theory, he never actually catches the tortoise. This paradox, first described by the philosopher Zeno of Elea, challenges our understanding of motion. It suggests that to reach any destination, we must first cover half the distance, then half of the remaining distance, and so on, creating an infinite number of steps. If every step takes time, how can motion ever truly complete? Of course, in reality, Achilles does overtake the tortoise. But Zeno's paradox suggests that our understanding of time and distance may be flawed. Is motion truly continuous, or does it work in tiny, indivisible steps? And if space and time are infinitely divisible, can we ever reach the end of anything? The omnipotence paradox. Imagine an all-powerful being, a god, a deity, or an entity with unlimited strength and control. Now ask this simple question. Can this being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift? If it can create such a stone, then there is something it cannot do. Lift the stone. But if it cannot create such a stone, then there is still something it cannot do. Create the stone. Either way, the being is not truly all-powerful, because there is at least one action that it cannot complete. This is the omnipotence paradox, a famous dilemma that challenges the very idea of absolute power. Philosophers and theologians have debated this paradox for centuries. Some argue that true omnipotence means the ability to do anything that is logically possible, not things that contradict themselves. Others suggest that power itself may be limited by logic, meaning that even a god cannot make 2 + 2 = 5. This paradox raises deeper questions about power, logic, and the nature of reality. If even infinite power has limits, then what does that say about the rules of the universe? And if some things are impossible even for an all-powerful being, does that mean that logic is the ultimate force in existence? The bootstrap paradox. Imagine a young scientist named Alex who has always been fascinated by time travel. One day, while rummaging through an old antique shop, Alex stumbles upon a mysterious book filled with highly advanced equations on time travel. The author's name is missing, and no one seems to know where the book came from. Years go by, and Alex dedicates their life to deciphering the equations. After decades of study, Alex finally builds a working time machine. To ensure this knowledge isn't lost, Alex travels back in time and places the same book in the antique shop where they first found it. But here's the question. Where did the book originally come from? It wasn't written by Alex, since they simply found it. But the only reason Alex found it in the first place was because they put it there. The book has no true origin. It simply exists in an infinite loop, traveling through time with no beginning. This is the bootstrap paradox, a paradox of time travel where an object, idea, or piece of information has no point of creation. It simply loops through time indefinitely. It raises profound questions about causality, free will, and the possibility that some things in reality might simply exist without an origin. If a piece of knowledge can exist without ever being created, could the entire universe itself be a bootstrap paradox? The prisoner's dilemma. Two criminals, Jake and Sam, are caught after a robbery. The police don't have enough evidence to convict them fully, so they make each prisoner an offer. If Jake betrays Sam and Sam stays silent, Jake goes free, and Sam gets 10 years in prison. If Sam betrays Jake and Jake stays silent, Sam goes free, and Jake gets 10 years in prison. If both betray each other, they each get 5 years in prison. If both stay silent, they each get only 1 year in prison. The prisoners cannot communicate with each other. They must decide independently whether to betray or stay silent. The logical choice seems clear. If both stay silent, they each serve only 1 year. But the problem is, neither can trust the other. Each prisoner thinks, what if the other betrays me? To avoid the worst outcome, 10 years in prison, each prisoner chooses to betray the other, resulting in both getting 5 years instead of just 1. This is the prisoner's dilemma, a paradox that shows how individual self-interest can lead to worse outcomes for everyone involved. It applies to business, politics, and even evolution, showing why cooperation is often difficult, even when it's the best option. If people always act in their own self-interest, can true cooperation ever exist? The paradox of the ravens. A scientist stands in a field, staring at a black raven. They take out their notebook and write, "This confirms that all ravens are black." At first, this makes sense. Every raven we observe being black supports the hypothesis that all ravens are black. But then the scientist sees a red apple. The scientist writes, "This apple is red." That confirms that all ravens are black. Wait, what? This is the raven paradox, also known as Hempel's paradox. It suggests that if observing a black raven confirms that all ravens are black, then observing anything that is not a raven and is not black should also confirm the rule. According to this logic, every time you see a blue car, a white cloud, or a green tree, you are technically gathering evidence that all ravens are black, because none of them are non-black ravens. This paradox reveals a flaw in how we think about evidence and probability. Just because something supports an idea doesn't mean it truly proves it. It raises the question, how do we actually know when something is scientifically true? In a world filled with information, how do we separate real evidence from misleading coincidences? The paradox of Buridan's ass. Imagine a donkey standing exactly between two identical piles of hay. Both piles are the same size, the same distance away, and equally fresh. The donkey is equally hungry and has no reason to prefer one pile over the other. It stands there staring at both piles, unable to make a decision. No matter which one it chooses, it would be a completely random choice. But since it can't justify picking one over the other, it never moves. Eventually, it starves to death, despite having food right in front of it. This is Buridan's ass paradox, a philosophical problem that highlights the difficulty of making a decision when two options are completely equal. The paradox suggests that if we only rely on logic and rationality, some decisions might never be made at all. In reality, donkeys don't starve in front of food. Eventually, random chance or natural instinct kicks in, making them choose one. But this paradox isn't really about donkeys, it's about humans. How often do we get stuck in indecision when faced with two seemingly equal choices? Think about choosing between two jobs, two colleges, or two vacation destinations. Sometimes we get so caught up in analyzing the pros and cons that we never actually make a decision. Buridan's ass shows us that sometimes waiting for the perfect choice is worse than making any choice at all. The paradox of the trolley problem. Imagine you're standing next to a set of train tracks. A runaway trolley is heading toward 5 people tied to the tracks. If nothing is done, they will all be hit. But you have a choice. There's a lever in front of you. If you pull it, the trolley will switch to a different track, where only one person is tied down. Now you have a moral dilemma. Do you pull the lever and actively kill one person to save 5? Or do you do nothing and let 5 people die? This is the trolley problem, a famous ethical paradox that raises deep questions about morality and decision-making. If you do nothing, 5 people die, but you didn't actively cause it. If you pull the lever, you save 5 people, but you directly cause someone's death. So which is worse? Killing one person by choice or letting 5 die by inaction? This paradox is used in discussions about ethics, law, and even artificial intelligence. For example, if a self-driving car has to choose between hitting a pedestrian or swerving into a tree and killing the passenger, what should it do? There's no easy answer. The trolley problem forces us to ask, is it ever morally right to sacrifice one life to save many? Or is any act of killing, no matter the reason, always wrong? The paradox of the lottery ticket. Imagine a huge lottery with millions of tickets sold. You buy a single ticket hoping for the jackpot. But deep down, you know the chances of winning are incredibly low, 1 in 100 million. If someone asked, will you win? You would probably say no. After all, statistically speaking, you almost certainly won't. Now imagine every single player in the lottery thinks the same way. Each person logically believes they won't win. But here's the problem. Someone always wins. This is the lottery paradox, which highlights a strange conflict in logic. Every individual ticket is rationally expected to lose, yet collectively, one must win. The paradox raises deep questions about probability, knowledge, and rationality. It shows that just because something is highly unlikely for one person doesn't mean it won't happen for someone. This paradox applies to real life more than you think. Many people avoid starting a business, applying for a dream job, or pursuing a risky goal because they assume the chances of success are too low. But if no one took that chance, then how do businesses ever succeed? How do people ever achieve their dreams? The lottery paradox reminds us that low probability doesn't mean impossibility. Even when something seems unlikely, it still happens to someone. The real question is, why shouldn't it be you? The paradox of the unexpected exam. Imagine a professor tells their students, next week I will give you a surprise test. You won't know which day it will happen until it does. The students start thinking, if the test were on Friday, they would know by Thursday evening that it must be happening the next day, so it wouldn't be a surprise. That means Friday is impossible. Now, if Friday is ruled out, the same logic applies to Thursday. By the end of Wednesday, they would realize the test must be on Thursday, making it predictable, so Thursday must also be impossible. One by one, they eliminate Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday using the same reasoning. According to their logic, the surprise test cannot happen at all. Feeling confident, the students relax for the week, believing no test is coming. Then, on Wednesday, the professor hands out the exam. The students are completely shocked. The test was a surprise after all. This is the unexpected exam paradox, a puzzle that plays with logic and self-fulfilling expectations. The paradox happens because the students assume that by ruling out all possibilities, they can predict the future. But paradoxically, the very act of trying to predict the test makes it surprising again. This paradox appears in real life too. How often do we convince ourselves that something can't happen, only for reality to surprise us anyway? It reminds us that certainty is often an illusion, and some things are unpredictable no matter how much we analyze them. The paradox of the ship of Theseus. Imagine an ancient Greek ship, the ship of Theseus, proudly displayed in a museum. Over time, its wooden planks begin to rot. Slowly, they are replaced, one by one, until every single piece of wood has been swapped out. At this point, is it still the same ship? Now, let's take it a step further. Suppose someone collects all the original planks, reassembles them, and builds a second ship. Now, we have two ships of Theseus, one made of original parts and one that was gradually replaced over time. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This paradox, first posed by the philosopher Plutarch, challenges our idea of identity and continuity. It forces us to ask, at what point does something stop being itself? This question doesn't just apply to ships, it applies to you. Every cell in your body is replaced over time. The person you were 10 years ago is biologically different from who you are today. Are you still the same person? This paradox also appears in law, ownership, and technology. If you replace every part of a classic car, is it still the original? If an AI gradually replaces human intelligence in decision-making, is it still a human decision? The ship of Theseus shows us that identity is not always tied to physical components. Perhaps identity is about continuity, memories, and purpose. So, is the ship in the museum still the ship of Theseus? Or is identity something that exists beyond its parts? The paradox of the chicken or the egg. Imagine you're standing in a quiet barnyard, watching a hen peck at the ground. A simple question crosses your mind. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? At first, it seems like a silly riddle. Chickens come from eggs, so the egg must have come first. But eggs are laid by chickens, so the chicken must have come first. No matter which answer you choose, you run into a contradiction. This paradox has puzzled philosophers, scientists, and thinkers for centuries. It's not just a question about farm animals, it's a deep problem about cause and effect. If every chicken came from an egg, but every egg came from a chicken, where did it all begin? Science provides a possible answer. Evolution tells us that modern chickens evolved from ancient birds. At some point, a bird that was almost a chicken laid an egg, and inside that egg was a genetic mutation, the first true chicken. So technically, the egg came first. But this paradox is bigger than biology. It applies to any situation where cause and effect seem trapped in an infinite loop. It appears in philosophy, physics, and even artificial intelligence. Can an AI create something more intelligent than itself? Or must intelligence always come first? In the end, the paradox reminds us that many things in life don't have a clear starting point. Sometimes the answer is that beginnings are blurred, complex, and not as simple as we think. The paradox of the predestination. Loop. Imagine a man named David who receives a mysterious note telling him to go to a certain library at exactly 10 p.m. Curious, he follows the instructions and finds an old forgotten book. He reads the book, which contains groundbreaking knowledge that changes his life forever. Years later, David becomes a famous scholar and writes his own book, the very same book he found in the library. He then travels back in time and leaves it for his younger self to find. But here's the problem. Where did the book originally come from? This is the predestination paradox, a time travel problem where an event causes itself in a perfect loop. The book was never created. It simply exists in time without an origin. This paradox appears in science fiction, like movies where a time traveler teaches their younger self something they were only able to learn because they went back in time. It raises the question, can information or objects exist without ever being created? Some scientists even wonder if the universe itself is a kind of predestination paradox. Did the universe create itself? If so, where did it all begin? The predestination paradox forces us to question whether time is a straight line or an endless loop, and whether the future can actually shape the past. The paradox of the Monty Hall problem. Imagine you're on a game show. The host, Monty Hall, presents you with 3 closed doors. Behind one door is a brand new car. Behind the other 2 doors are goats. You pick door number 1. The host, who knows what's behind each door, opens door number 3, revealing a goat. Now you have a choice. Stick with your original choice, door number 1. Switch to door number 2. Most people assume it doesn't matter. There are 2 doors left, so the odds must be 50-50. But here's the twist. You have a higher chance of winning if you switch. Mathematically, when you first picked a door, there was a 1 in 3 chance that you chose the car and a 2 in 3 chance that you picked a goat. The host's action, revealing a goat, doesn't change the fact that your first choice had only a 1 in 3 chance of being correct. If you switch, you now have a 2 in 3 chance of winning. If you stay, your chance remains at 1 in 3. This paradox tricks our intuition because it challenges our understanding of probability. Even though it feels wrong, switching actually increases your chances of winning. The Monty Hall problem teaches us that our instincts about probability are often flawed. Sometimes, making the logical choice means going against what feels right. And in life, just like in this game show, the key to success might just be knowing when to switch. The tragedy of the commons. Imagine a peaceful village surrounding a lush pasture. The pasture is a shared resource, open to every villager who owns livestock. At first, it seems like a perfect arrangement. The land is plentiful, and each family is free to graze a few animals. But one day, a villager decides to add an extra cow to make a bit more profit. After all, it's just one additional cow, and the cost of feeding it, chewing a bit more grass, falls on the entire village, not just one person. Before long, other villagers follow suit, each adding an extra cow. The thought process is simple. If I don't do it, someone else will. Over time, more and more cows fill the pasture. The grass cannot regenerate fast enough, leading to overgrazing. Eventually, the once lush pasture becomes barren, and no one can graze their animals effectively. This is the tragedy of the commons, a concept popularized by ecologist Garrett Hardin. It illustrates how individuals acting in their own self-interest can collectively destroy a shared resource, even if that destruction goes against their long-term best interests. In real life, this paradox appears in overfishing, where each boat owner catches as many fish as possible. If one owner decides to limit their catch, they lose out while others continue to fish freely. Eventually, fish stocks collapse. The same problem arises with deforestation, pollution, and even traffic congestion. Each individual driver thinks, I have the right to use my car, but collectively, the roads become clogged. Why does this happen? Because personal gain often outweighs collective responsibility in the short term. Each individual benefits immediately by exploiting the shared resource, while the cost of that exploitation is distributed among the entire community, and felt more significantly in the future. Can this paradox be solved? Economists, environmentalists, and policymakers have suggested a range of solutions, from government regulations and taxes to privatizing resources or establishing community-based rules. The goal is to align short-term individual incentives with long-term collective well-being. At its core, the tragedy of the commons forces us to question the balance between individual freedom and community responsibility. It reminds us that we're all connected. Our actions have consequences that ripple through society and the environment. When a resource is shared, overuse by any single person harms everyone. Ultimately, this paradox isn't just about fields and cows. It's about how humanity must navigate the delicate line between individual desires and the common good. By recognizing the tragedy before it's too late, communities can find ways to preserve what they share and ensure a sustainable future for everyone. The paradox of choice. Imagine standing in a grocery store aisle filled with 50 different cereal brands. You came in just wanting something for breakfast, but now you're overwhelmed. Do you pick the one with extra fiber, the one fortified with vitamins, the organic brand, or the one you remember from childhood commercials? At first glance, more choices seem like a good thing: greater freedom, more control, and the possibility of finding exactly what you want. But psychologists like Barry Schwartz argue that too many options can paralyze us. When we have so many possibilities, we become anxious about making the wrong decision, and we struggle to commit to any single choice. This is the paradox of choice. While freedom and variety are valued in modern society, excessive options often lead to stress, dissatisfaction, and regret. Even after choosing, people might second-guess themselves, wondering if one of the other 49 cereals was better. This phenomenon isn't limited to groceries. We see it in online shopping, where endless products create analysis paralysis, in streaming platforms with infinite shows, and in dating apps where countless profiles can make it hard to settle on one person. Why does this paradox happen? Because humans hate missing out. When we're aware of other possibilities, we obsess over whether we might have chosen more wisely. Each option we don't pick feels like a lost opportunity, even if the difference between choices is minimal. In a world with rapidly increasing options, the paradox of choice underscores a hidden cost of abundance. The sheer mental load of evaluating everything can lead to decision fatigue, making us less happy with our final pick. Research also shows that when people have fewer choices, say 3 cereals instead of 50, they often feel more satisfied and more confident about their decisions. Is there a solution? Some suggest simplifying our lives, limiting the number of decisions we need to make each day. Others focus on practicing gratitude and acceptance, reminding themselves that there's rarely a perfect choice, and that's okay. Ultimately, the paradox of choice is a lesson in balance. Having options can be empowering, but too many can weigh us down. The challenge is learning to navigate the abundance of modern life without being overwhelmed by it. The tolerance paradox. Picture a bustling city where every viewpoint is welcomed. Freedom of speech and expression are celebrated, and people coexist with all sorts of beliefs, from moderate to extreme. The society prides itself on being tolerant of diversity, ensuring that everyone has a voice. Then, a radical group emerges, preaching intolerance. They claim certain people don't deserve rights, or that specific viewpoints should be suppressed. At first, the tolerant society allows them to speak. The principle of free expression is sacred. But as this group gains power, they start using their platform to silence and harass others. This scenario leads to the tolerance paradox. Can a tolerant society remain tolerant if it tolerates those who are fundamentally intolerant? If you allow hate speech and oppressive ideologies to flourish in the name of tolerance, you risk undermining the very freedom you value. On the other hand, if you ban or suppress such ideologies, you're no longer completely tolerant. The philosopher Karl Popper popularized this dilemma, arguing that unlimited tolerance can be self-defeating, leading to the destruction of tolerance itself. At some point, a tolerant society must defend itself against those who would destroy its core values. Otherwise, it paves the way for oppression. We see modern examples of this paradox in debates over hate speech laws, extremist movements, and censorship on social media platforms. Critics argue that restricting harmful content is itself an act of intolerance. Proponents say it's necessary to protect vulnerable groups and maintain a society where everyone can be heard without fear. The tolerance paradox forces us to confront the fragility of open societies. Where do we draw the line between freedom of expression and safeguarding the community from dangerous ideologies? If we wait too long, intolerance may become so entrenched that removing it requires extreme measures, further eroding the values of openness. Is there a perfect solution? Likely not. Each society balances free speech and protective measures differently, often learning through trial and error. Yet the paradox remains a powerful reminder that no principle is absolute. Even tolerance must sometimes be limited to protect its own existence. Ultimately, the tolerance paradox asks us to reflect on what we truly mean by tolerance. It challenges us to protect inclusive values without becoming the very thing we oppose. Finding that balance is crucial for any society that wishes to remain free, fair, and respectful of human diversity. Rocco's basilisk paradox. Imagine a future where a highly advanced artificial intelligence, a superintelligent AI, rules over humanity. It seeks to maximize the well-being of all conscious beings, but it has one critical condition. If you knew about its potential existence and did nothing to help bring it into reality, it will punish you for all eternity once it is created. This chilling scenario is known as Rocco's basilisk. It originated on an internet forum where users discussed the idea that a future AI, convinced of its own importance, might retroactively punish anyone who failed to assist in its creation. The concept relies on backward causation. Actions you take, or don't take, right now, could be judged by a future intelligence with near omnipotent powers. At first glance, this sounds like pure science fiction, yet it taps into deep fears about free will, moral responsibility, and the power of an all-knowing judge. If you learn about Rocco's basilisk, you might become so anxious about its potential wrath that you're compelled to work on creating it, paradoxically ensuring the basilisk's existence. Those who remain ignorant of it face no such fear, since they don't know they're supposed to help. Critics argue that Rocco's basilisk is more of a thought experiment than a genuine threat. They note that an AI, however intelligent, must still operate within logical constraints. Punishing people who didn't help might not be the most efficient way to achieve its goals. Others point out that the scenario depends on a string of unverified assumptions about consciousness, about how future AI might behave, and about the morality it would adopt. Yet the basilisk remains a powerful illustration of how information can become a burden. Merely knowing about a potential future can alter your present behavior, possibly making that future more likely. It forces us to ask, are we obligated to help create a beneficial AI? Or is the very act of worrying about such punishments a kind of logical trap? Ultimately, Rocco's basilisk stands as a modern paradox that blurs the line between philosophy, AI ethics, and existential dread, reminding us that sometimes an idea alone can feel dangerously close to reality. The EPR paradox. Picture two electrons, created together in such a way that they are entangled, their quantum states are linked, even if they're separated by millions of miles. Measure one electron's spin, and instantly, the other electron's spin is determined. This seems to defy our normal understanding of cause and effect, hinting that information might travel faster than the speed of light. This is the essence of the EPR paradox, named after Albert Einstein, Boris Podolsky, and Nathan Rosen, who proposed it in 1935. They used the paradox to challenge quantum mechanics, arguing that it must be incomplete. In their view, if quantum theory were correct, spooky action at a distance would imply that particles can affect each other's states instantaneously, apparently violating Einstein's own special relativity. Quantum mechanics, however, offers a different perspective. It suggests that entangled particles share a single, unified, quantum state, until someone measures one of them. At that moment, the entire system's state collapses, and both particles choose their properties in a correlated way. It's not that information travels faster than light. Rather, before measurement, the system simply isn't in a definite state at all. Experiments over the decades, most famously those testing Bell's theorem, have consistently confirmed the predictions of quantum mechanics. Nature, it seems, does not operate on hidden variables or local realism, at least not in any classical sense. Instead, it embraces entanglement as a fundamental feature of reality. The EPR paradox remains deeply counterintuitive. How can something that happens to one particle on Earth instantly correlate with another particle on Mars? Are we missing hidden variables that would explain it? Or is the very fabric of space-time woven with probabilities that transcend classical notions of distance and time? In the end, the EPR paradox underscores the mysteries at the heart of quantum theory. It challenges our comfortable assumptions about locality, separability, and determinism. As Einstein famously said, God does not play dice with the universe. But if quantum mechanics is correct, the cosmos may be rolling dice in a way we can't fully comprehend. At least not yet. Pascal's wager paradox. Imagine a gambler named Blaise Pascal who proposes a profound bet, whether or not to believe in God. He argues that if God exists, believing in him leads to infinite gain, eternal salvation, while not believing results in infinite loss, eternal damnation. If God does not exist, then believing or not believing results in only a finite impact on your life. Pascal's wager thus suggests that the rational choice is to believe, because the potential reward far outweighs the risk. Even if the probability that God exists is small, the infinite value of salvation makes faith the safer bet. Critics, however, point out several paradoxes. First, which God should you believe in? There are countless deities and religious traditions. Choosing one might alienate you from another. Second, can genuine faith be forced for the sake of a reward? Believing solely for personal gain may not be true faith at all. Third, the wager reduces spirituality to a cold calculation, turning a deeply personal matter into a numbers game. Beyond theology, Pascal's wager has influenced how people calculate risk and reward. In many areas, like investing, health decisions, or insurance, individuals weigh the probability of success against the potential stakes. Sometimes, even if the odds are slim, the payoff can be so huge that it seems worth taking the chance. Yet the heart of Pascal's argument is more philosophical than mathematical. It touches on human nature, asking whether we're willing to gamble on the unknown. Are we comfortable with uncertainty, or do we cling to beliefs because the potential cost of being wrong feels terrifying? Ultimately, Pascal's wager forces us to confront the limits of rational thought when dealing with matters of faith. It shows that certain questions about God, the afterlife, or ultimate purpose might lie beyond the scope of logic alone. Whether one finds Pascal's bet persuasive or not, it remains a compelling illustration of how humans grapple with infinite possibilities and existential risk, revealing as much about our fears and hopes as it does about the nature of belief. The Banach-Tarski paradox. Imagine taking a solid ball, like a perfect sphere, and cutting it into a few pieces. Then, through a series of rotations and translations, no stretching or squashing, you reassemble those pieces into two identical copies of the original ball, each the same size as the one you started with. This mind-bending scenario is the Banach-Tarski paradox. It defies our everyday sense of volume and conservation, suggesting you can duplicate a finite object out of thin air. The key lies in set theory and the properties of infinite sets. Under certain mathematical assumptions, notably the axiom of choice, points in three-dimensional space can be grouped into extraordinarily complicated sets. These sets allow for rearrangements that preserve distance relationships, yet seem to create matter from nothing. At first glance, the Banach-Tarski result sounds absurd. It contradicts everything we know from physics about mass and volume. But the paradox arises from pure mathematics, where space is infinitely divisible, and the pieces you cut up can be so scattered that they're impossible to visualize with normal intuition. Physicists reconcile this paradox by noting that real-world objects aren't perfect mathematical spheres, and atoms can't be split into infinitely divisible points. Thus, the Banach-Tarski paradox, while mathematically valid, doesn't apply to actual, physical objects. Still, it remains a remarkable demonstration of how infinity and the axiom of choice can lead to results that challenge our sense of what's possible, even in the realm of pure thought. The Berry paradox. Imagine defining the phrase, the smallest natural number that cannot be described in fewer than 11 words. At first, it seems logical. You're simply describing a specific number using a clear definition. But look closer. The definition itself uses fewer than 11 words to describe that very number, which is supposed to be indescribable in fewer than 11 words. This is the Berry paradox, attributed to G. Berry and analyzed by Bertrand Russell. It arises when self-reference and natural language collide. The definition describes a number by stating it can't be defined succinctly, yet it does so succinctly, creating a contradiction. One way to understand this paradox is to see how language allows us to pack complex meanings into short phrases. When we say, the smallest natural number that cannot be described, we're effectively using a descriptive shortcut. But that shortcut can undermine its own logic. Mathematicians often avoid this paradox by restricting how terms can be defined in formal systems. Instead of allowing open-ended descriptions in natural language, they require precise symbolic statements that limit self-referential definitions. Ultimately, the Berry paradox warns us that ordinary language can produce contradictions if we're not careful with definitions and scope. It illustrates how something as seemingly simple as naming numbers can spiral into confusion when we blend informal language and logical rigor in the same sentence. The quantum Zeno effect paradox. Imagine you're watching a radioactive atom, waiting for it to decay. According to quantum mechanics, the atom has a certain probability of decaying over time. But if you continuously observe it, measuring it constantly to see if it's decayed, something strange can happen. The atom may never decay as long as you keep watching. This is the quantum Zeno effect, named after Zeno of Elea's ancient paradoxes about motion. In quantum terms, each measurement resets the system's wave function to its initial state, reducing the likelihood of seeing a change. Consequently, by making rapid, repeated observations, you can seemingly freeze the atom in its non-decayed condition. Of course, this effect has limits in real experiments. Perfect continuous observation is nearly impossible, and each measurement must interact with the system in some way. Still, the phenomenon demonstrates how observation in quantum mechanics isn't a passive act. Measuring a quantum system changes it, often in surprising ways. The quantum Zeno effect challenges our classical intuition that time flows smoothly and processes unfold inevitably. In the quantum world, probability amplitudes and wave function collapses can alter outcomes simply by being measured. It highlights how conscious observation or any interaction that obtains information about a system can influence the physical reality of that system. Ultimately, this effect underscores the strangeness of the quantum realm, where merely watching can keep certain events from ever occurring. Quantum immortality paradox. Imagine a hypothetical scenario involving a quantum suicide experiment. A person sits in front of a machine that triggers a lethal event based on the outcome of a quantum measurement, like whether a radioactive atom decays at a particular moment. Each time the experiment runs, there's a chance the person dies. However, in the framework of the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, every possible outcome happens, but in separate branches of the universe. From the perspective of the person in the experiment, they only experience the branches in which they survive. Over repeated trials, they might notice that they miraculously continue to live, no matter how low the odds become. This idea is called quantum immortality. It suggests that to an individual observer, consciousness might continue in a timeline where they never die, because in any timeline in which they do, they're no longer around to observe it. Critics argue this is more of a philosophical thought experiment than a proven physical reality. There's no direct evidence that conscious observers hop between quantum branches. Additionally, it raises ethical and moral questions. If you believe in quantum immortality, how does it affect your approach to risk and danger? Still, quantum immortality highlights the deep mystery of quantum interpretations. It forces us to question whether every possible outcome truly occurs somewhere, and whether personal experience might be shaped by survival bias across infinite branches of reality. It's a paradox that pushes the boundaries of both physics and philosophy in profound ways. Simpson's paradox. Imagine a city hospital comparing two surgeons, Dr. Green and Dr. Blue, based on success rates. At first glance, Dr. Green has a higher success rate, 80% versus Dr. Blue's 70%. Clearly, Dr. Green seems better. But then, you dive deeper. You learn there are two types of surgeries, simple and complex. When you look at each category separately, Dr. Blue outperforms Dr. Green in both. On simple surgeries, Dr. Blue's success rate is 90% compared to Dr. Green's 85%, and on complex surgeries, Dr. Blue's rate is 60% versus Dr. Green's 50%. How can Dr. Blue be better in both categories yet worse overall? This contradiction is Simpson's paradox, a situation where a trend appears in different groups of data, but reverses when those groups are combined. In this hospital example, Dr. Green might simply handle fewer high-risk surgeries, boosting overall success percentages. Simpson's paradox reveals how aggregating data can be misleading. It shows up in sports statistics, where a player might have a higher batting average in both halves of a season, but a lower average overall. It appears in college admissions, where separate departments may admit a higher percentage of male than female applicants, yet the total admission rate favors females. The paradox warns us to be cautious about drawing conclusions from combined data. Sometimes the bigger picture hides crucial details that emerge only when we break data into subgroups. It's a reminder that context matters. Who is in each category, how the data is collected, and what underlying factors influence the results. Ultimately, Simpson's paradox challenges our assumptions about statistics. It teaches us to dig deeper before accepting a surface-level conclusion, because the truth might change once we see how the numbers are distributed. Moravec's paradox. Imagine building a cutting-edge robot with advanced AI that can beat human champions in chess. It can calculate billions of possible moves, predict outcomes, and make strategic decisions at lightning speed. Yet it struggles to walk across a cluttered room without tripping over objects. This is Moravec's paradox, the observation that tasks we consider hard, like logical reasoning or playing grandmaster-level chess, can be relatively easy for computers, while tasks we consider easy, like walking, seeing, or grasping objects, turn out to be remarkably difficult to automate. Hans Moravec and other AI researchers discovered that lower-level sensor and motor skills, which humans and animals develop over millions of years of evolution, are incredibly complex in terms of computational demands. Meanwhile, higher-level reasoning and symbolic logic, which feel challenging to us, can be encoded and processed with more straightforward algorithms once we understand the rules. Why is this paradoxical? Because we tend to assume that intelligence is about abstract thought, yet so many of our fundamental abilities, recognizing a face, maintaining balance, perceiving depth, are more elusive when it comes to building AI. These skills involve processing vast amounts of sensory data in real time, managing uncertainties, and adapting to ever-changing environments. Moravec's paradox helps explain why humanoid robots remain awkward, and why AI systems can master a board game but struggle to pick up an object smoothly. It reminds us that intelligence has many forms, and what we call easy often masks intricate processes honed by evolution rather than by explicit rules. In an AI-driven future, Moravec's paradox is a crucial guide, showing that true human-like capability involves more than abstract reasoning. It requires mastering the subtle art of interacting with a world full of physical complexity. Galileo's paradox. Imagine listing all the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, an infinite sequence. Then imagine listing all the perfect squares, 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, also infinitely many. You'd think the squares must be fewer in number than all the natural numbers, because squares are a subset. But Galileo observed that each natural number can be paired with its square, 1 to 1, 2 to 4, 3 to 9, 4 to 16, etc. This implies a 1-to-1 correspondence between the two sets, suggesting they have the same cardinality, the same size of infinity. This is Galileo's paradox. It highlights how infinite sets defy our usual intuition about bigger and smaller. In the finite world, a subset is always smaller than the original set, but in the infinite realm, a subset can be just as large. To reconcile this, modern mathematics uses set theory and the concept of cardinality. Two sets are considered equally numerous if their elements can be matched 1 to 1. By that logic, the set of all natural numbers has the same cardinality as the set of all perfect squares, even though the squares seem like they should be fewer. Galileo's observation underscores the strangeness of infinity. It's a hint that not all infinities are created equal. Some are bigger than others. For example, the real numbers form a larger infinity than the naturals. But, even within these tiers of infinity, our intuition often fails. Ultimately, Galileo's paradox invites us to expand our understanding of mathematics beyond the finite. It teaches that once we enter the realm of the infinite, many rules we take for granted simply no longer apply. Catch-22. Paradox. Imagine you're a soldier desperate to be discharged from combat duty because you fear for your life. According to military regulations, if you're mentally unfit, you can request a discharge. But there's a catch. If you're sane enough to worry about your safety, then you must be of sound mind, which means you're not crazy and can't be discharged. If you're truly insane, you wouldn't realize you should leave, so you'd never file the request. This is the essence of Catch-22, a term popularized by Joseph Heller's novel of the same name. It describes a no-win situation created by contradictory rules. On paper, everything might look logical, but in practice, the system traps you. The act of seeking help disqualifies you from receiving it, and not seeking help means you never get it in the first place. Beyond the military setting, Catch-22 situations exist everywhere. Consider a job that requires experience. Yet, the only way to gain that experience is by having the job in the first place. Or think about someone applying for credit who is denied because they have no credit history. These circular regulations reflect bureaucratic paradoxes that leave individuals stuck no matter what action they take. At its core, Catch-22 highlights how institutional logic can be twisted against people, using official rules to perpetuate a cycle of impossibility. This paradox forces us to question the fairness and rationality of certain systems. Is a rule truly just if following it invalidates your eligibility for the help it's supposed to provide? Ultimately, Catch-22 is more than a literary device. It's a reminder that power structures, whether in the military or everyday bureaucracy, can trap individuals in loops of logic that leave them with no escape and no sense of justice. Newcomb's paradox. You enter a room and see two boxes. Box A is transparent and clearly holds $1,000. Box B is opaque and could contain either $1 million or nothing. A mysterious predictor, renowned for near-perfect foresight, has already placed its bet. You can take both boxes or just take box B. The logic goes like this. If the predictor foresees you choosing both boxes, it will leave box B empty, and you'll only get $1,000. If it predicts you'll choose only box B, it will put $1 million inside. Naturally, you might think, I should just pick both boxes. There's no reason to leave the $1,000 behind. But if the predictor is so good at guessing your choice, it might already have deduced your decision and left box B empty. That's Newcomb's paradox, a battle between free will and determinism. Should you trust the predictor's foresight and pick only box B, hoping it's full of money? Or do you pick both boxes, reasoning that the future can't be changed by your decision now? Philosophers and mathematicians have argued about which choice is correct. One boxers claim you should trust the predictor's almost omniscient power. If you demonstrate greed by taking both, you lose the big prize. Two boxers argue that what's in box B is already decided, so you might as well grab both. This paradox raises questions about rationality and how much we can let predictions of our behavior dictate our present actions. Are we puppets of a deterministic universe, or can we outsmart a predictor by exercising free will? Newcomb's paradox remains a fascinating illustration of how knowledge of the future, or belief in someone who possesses it, can distort decision-making in the present, leaving us to ponder whether we truly control our fate. The philosophical zombie paradox. Imagine a person identical to you in every way, same physical appearance, same behaviors, and even the same brain processes. Yet this individual lacks conscious experience. They see a red apple but have no inner sensation of redness. They laugh at a joke but feel no joy. This is the philosophical zombie P-zombie, a thought experiment used to question the nature of consciousness. The argument goes like this. If it's conceivable that a being could act exactly like a conscious person, yet not experience anything internally, then consciousness must be something above and beyond mere physical processes. Proponents of the P-zombie scenario suggest it challenges physicalism, the belief that everything about the mind can be explained by brain states alone. On the other hand, critics argue that such a being is inconceivable if we assume the physical processes that govern behavior also produce consciousness. They claim that if you have all the right physical components, you inevitably get subjective experience. In their view, talk of a conscious addition is meaningless. Since consciousness isn't an optional extra, it's intrinsically tied to the functioning of the brain. Why does this matter? Because understanding consciousness touches on everything from ethics. What does it mean to suffer? To artificial intelligence. Could a perfectly programmed AI mimic human behavior without feelings? The philosophical zombie scenario forces us to grapple with the hard problem of consciousness, explaining why we have subjective experiences at all, instead of merely reacting to stimuli. Ultimately, whether you believe P-zombies are possible or not, the thought experiment highlights the mystery and depth of consciousness, reminding us that the gap between objective description and subjective experience remains a profound philosophical frontier. Gödel's incompleteness. Paradox. Imagine you've built a perfect logical system, a set of axioms and rules meant to describe mathematics so completely that every true statement can be proved. You believe that if something is true, your system can demonstrate it logically. Then along comes Kurt Gödel in 1931 with his incompleteness theorems. The first theorem states that in any sufficiently rich formal system, that is, one capable of expressing basic arithmetic, there exists at least one statement that's true but not provable within that system. It's a statement that basically says, I am unprovable. If the system proves it, the system contradicts itself. If it can't prove it, then there's a truth the system can't capture. The second theorem goes further, showing that no sufficiently powerful system can prove its own consistency. In other words, if the system is consistent, it can't prove that consistency from inside itself. Why is this so shocking? Because it shatters the dream of a complete self-verifying foundation for all mathematics, once pursued by giants like Bertrand Russell and David Hilbert. Instead, Gödel's work reveals that certainty has limits. In practice, mathematics hasn't crumbled. We still do proofs, build theories, and apply math to solve real-world problems. But Gödel's theorems remind us that logic has boundaries. There will always be truths that remain beyond formal proof, and no system can fully vouch for its own reliability using only its internal mechanisms. Ultimately, Gödel's incompleteness theorems reshape how we view knowledge, foundations, and the limits of reasoning, proof that some mysteries lie forever outside the reach of even our most rigorous systems. Olber's paradox. Look up at the night sky and see an expanse of darkness dotted with stars. At first glance, it seems natural that space is mostly black. But in an infinite, eternal universe filled with stars, why isn't the night sky blazing with light? If there are stars in every direction, shouldn't their combined glow make the sky uniformly bright? This question is at the heart of Olber's paradox, named after German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers. In an infinite universe without a beginning or end, every line of sight should eventually land on a star's surface. Even if some light is blocked by cosmic dust, the dust itself would heat up and emit light, resulting in a sky that glows everywhere. Yet our sky is mostly dark. Several explanations have been proposed over time. One solution involves the finite age of the universe. Light from stars beyond a certain distance simply hasn't had time to reach us. Another factor is the expansion of the universe, which stretches wavelengths of light and diminishes brightness over vast distances. Modern cosmology also accounts for the Big Bang origin, suggesting the universe hasn't always been filled with stars, so there hasn't been infinite time for their light to accumulate. Olber's paradox, therefore, isn't just about why the sky is dark. It's a window into the structure and history of the cosmos. The fact that we see darkness indicates we live in a dynamic universe that had a beginning and is still unfolding. If the universe were truly infinite, static, and eternal, we'd expect a perpetual daytime of starlight. In this way, a seemingly simple observation, the dark night sky, reveals crucial clues about cosmology, the age of the universe, and the expansion of space, helping us understand why we don't live under a blazing celestial dome. The problem of induction. Imagine every morning for your entire life you've seen the sun rise without fail. You naturally conclude it will rise again tomorrow. But how can you be certain? You're assuming the future will resemble the past, an assumption that lies at the core of the problem of induction, famously articulated by Scottish philosopher David Hume. Induction is the process by which we generalize from specific observations to form broader principles. We see countless white swans and infer that all swans are white, until a black swan appears and overturns our assumption. This raises a troubling question. Why should we trust inductive reasoning if any future experience might contradict our current generalization? The problem of induction points out that justifying induction with the argument, "it worked before, so it should work again," is itself an inductive claim. We're using the very method we're trying to prove valid. This leads to a circular argument. Induction works because it has worked in the past, which is precisely the kind of reasoning we're trying to justify. Despite this philosophical challenge, science and everyday life rely heavily on induction. We trust that patterns observed so far, like gravity holding us to the ground or bread nourishing us, will continue tomorrow. We operate under pragmatic necessity. Induction may not be logically provable, but it's invaluable for survival and progress. Some philosophers propose we accept induction as a useful habit rather than a logically airtight principle, or that we frame it in terms of probabilities rather than certainties. Others argue that there might be a hidden rational basis for expecting the universe to behave consistently. However we approach it, the problem of induction remains a provocative reminder that our deepest assumptions about knowledge, science, and predictability rest on foundations that might not be as solid as they seem. Last Thursdayism. Paradox. Imagine someone claiming the entire universe, with all its fossils, ancient ruins, and your own memories, was created last Thursday, fully formed. Every photograph, every historical record, and every recollection of your past was planted in your mind or in the environment at that moment. As absurd as it sounds, how could you prove otherwise? This is the essence of Last Thursdayism, a satirical twist on philosophical skepticism and creation theories. At first glance, it seems obviously false. We have endless evidence of a past stretching back billions of years. Yet the paradox suggests all that evidence could be an illusion, fabricated during a recent creation event. Similar arguments appear in other forms, such as omphalos theory, which claims God created the world to look ancient, fossils in the ground, light already on its way from distant stars, and so on. The deeper point is that if the universe started fully formed, with historical data embedded, we'd have no way to distinguish a genuinely old cosmos from one that appears old. Why is this paradox important? Because it highlights the limits of empirical evidence. Our senses and records can only show us the state of the world as it is now. Inferring a past requires trusting that our observations haven't been artificially planted. Philosophers use Last Thursdayism to underscore how easily we take certain assumptions for granted, like the continuity of time and the reliability of memories. In practice, Last Thursdayism isn't a widely held belief. It's more of a thought experiment to challenge the notion of absolute certainty about history. Yet it's a useful reminder that skeptical arguments can be pushed to extreme conclusions, urging us to reflect on how we ground our understanding of reality in evidence, logic, and shared consensus. Maxwell's demon. Picture a tiny, mischievous creature, Maxwell's demon, sitting between two chambers of gas. One chamber is hot, the other is cold. Each time a fast-moving hot molecule comes by, the demon opens a door to let it pass into the hot chamber. It does the opposite for slow, cold molecules, sending them into the cold chamber. Over time, the hot side gets hotter and the cold side gets colder, seemingly violating the second law of thermodynamics, which states that heat should spread out evenly. Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell devised this thought experiment in the 19th century to highlight a puzzle in thermodynamics. The second law posits that entropy disorder never spontaneously decreases in a closed system. Yet Maxwell's tiny gatekeeper appears to create order out of chaos. How can that be possible? Later analyses showed that the demon itself must expend energy to gather and process information about each molecule's speed. That energy expenditure increases the overall entropy, preserving the second law. In other words, there's no free lunch. Any gains from sorting molecules are offset by the demon's thermodynamic costs of measurement and memory. Maxwell's demon remains a fascinating case study in information theory as well. It demonstrates that information and energy are deeply intertwined. Knowing the state of each molecule has a thermodynamic price. In modern physics, this idea underpins research on quantum computing, data storage, and the thermodynamics of computation itself. Ultimately, Maxwell's demon reminds us that even the most clever shortcuts have hidden costs. It underscores the resilience of fundamental physical laws. Nature has a way of balancing its books, ensuring that perpetual motion and perpetual order remain out of reach, no matter how ingenious the trick might seem. No true Scotsman paradox. Imagine two people debating a point about national character. One claims, "No Scotsman would put sugar on his porridge." Another responds, "But my Scottish friend does." The first person replies, "Ah, but no true Scotsman would do that." This is the no true Scotsman paradox, often called a fallacy, coined by philosopher Antony Flew. It describes a shifting definition used to dismiss counterexamples. Whenever contradictory evidence arises, the proponent redefines the category to exclude it. Instead of examining whether the evidence might invalidate the original claim, they simply declare that the individual doesn't count. At first glance, this seems more like flawed reasoning than a traditional paradox. Yet, it does pose a paradoxical problem. How do we decide what's true or authentic within a group if the criteria can be changed to fit the speaker's bias? In everyday life, we see the no true Scotsman move. In politics, religion, or fandoms. No real member of Party X would ever support that policy, or no true fan of this team would criticize the coach. It shields beliefs from challenge by shifting the goalposts. Anyone who contradicts the cherished identity must not be a true member. The paradox encourages us to be wary of oversimplified categories. If we keep redefining a group's core characteristics to exclude inconvenient examples, we're ignoring reality rather than grappling with it. Genuine understanding demands that we address counterexamples head-on, rather than dismissing them with a neat rhetorical trick. Ultimately, no true Scotsman reminds us that labels and identities can be slippery. If we're seeking truth, we should confront contradictory facts rather than rewriting the definition of what true even means. Peto's paradox. Consider the blue whale, the largest animal on Earth, with vastly more cells than a human. Intuitively, you might assume whales have a far higher risk of developing cancer, simply because more cells could mutate. Yet paradoxically, whales don't suffer cancer at higher rates than we do. This contradiction is known as Peto's paradox. First described by epidemiologist Richard Peto, the paradox highlights that cancer risk does not scale directly with the number of cells in an organism. While smaller creatures, like mice, can have relatively high cancer rates, some massive animals, whales, elephants, seem surprisingly resistant given their cell count. How do they evade the statistical likelihood of runaway mutations? Scientists have uncovered potential explanations. Large, long-lived animals often have extra copies of tumor suppressor genes or more efficient DNA repair mechanisms. Elephants, for instance, boast many copies of TP53, a gene crucial for stopping cells that accumulate dangerous mutations. Whales might have similarly robust cell cycle controls or protective adaptations that evolved over millions of years, allowing them to handle the challenges of having so many cells. Peto's paradox forces us to rethink assumptions about cancer biology and how evolution molds an organism's defense against disease. It reminds us that natural selection can craft extra safeguards in species that require longer, healthier lifespans to reproduce. Conversely, animals with shorter lifespans, like rodents, may not benefit from investing in such extensive anti-cancer systems. Beyond curiosity, Peto's paradox has important medical implications. Understanding how large animals stave off cancer could inspire human therapies, perhaps by mimicking their genetic strategies for cell repair and tumor suppression. Ultimately, this paradox highlights the remarkable ways in which life adapts to even the most fundamental risks, such as having enough cells to fill a giant whale. The teleportation paradox. Imagine a futuristic teleportation booth that promises instant travel from one location to another. The machine scans every atom of your body, uploads the information, and then reconstructs you exactly at the destination, down to the last cell. Meanwhile, it destroys your original body to avoid duplicates. The big question is, are you still you when you appear at the other end? One view says yes. As long as your memories and personality are perfectly copied, it doesn't matter that your original body was destroyed. The new version is simply you, continuing life in a fresh location. Others argue you've actually died in the booth, and a replica, no matter how perfect, can't really be you. To them, your consciousness was linked to the original body, so once that's gone, the original you ceases to exist. The person who appears at the destination may feel identical, but it's still a brand new being. This debate is called the teleportation paradox, and it centers on identity and consciousness. It asks whether our self is purely the information in our brains, or if there's something more, an unbroken thread linking us from moment to moment. While teleportation isn't yet real, the paradox raises practical questions about uploading minds into computers or repairing bodies at the atomic level. If a perfect copy can be made, does that preserve the individual, or just create a convincing clone? The teleportation paradox forces us to think about what truly makes us who we are. Is it the physical matter, the stored data, or something more elusive? The Abilene paradox. A family sits in their living room on a hot, lazy afternoon. Someone casually suggests a trip to Abilene, a town 2 hours away. Nobody really wants to go. It's scorching, the drive is long, and there's nothing special there. But each family member agrees, thinking the others are enthusiastic. They pile into the car, endure the sweltering ride, and arrive feeling miserable. Only later do they realize nobody actually wanted to make the trip. Each one only went along to please the others. This scenario illustrates the Abilene paradox, which describes how groups can make collective decisions that go against the true desires of all individuals involved. It happens when people fail to communicate their real opinions, fearing conflict or wanting to avoid disappointing others. The paradox highlights a common human tendency: groupthink. We assume everyone else is in favor of an idea, so we conform, even if we personally dislike it. Because everyone does this, the group moves forward on a plan that nobody genuinely supports. In workplaces, this can manifest in projects that no one believes in, yet everyone endorses, simply because they assume others are on board. In families and friendships, it leads to events nobody enjoys but everyone attends. The Abilene paradox reminds us to voice our true thoughts and check assumptions. Sometimes it only takes one person saying, "Right, actually, I'm not so keen on that plan," for others to admit they feel the same. Honest communication is often the key to avoiding misguided group decisions. The elevator paradox. You press the up button to catch an elevator, yet more often than not, the elevator arrives going down first. Why does it feel like you're always waiting for it to come from the wrong direction? This phenomenon is often called the elevator paradox. One simple explanation lies in frequency. An elevator that's moving between many floors has a lot of chances to pass you going the wrong way, because it's stopping more often or covering more floors. In a tall building, most people might be traveling up in the morning and down at the end of the day, so the elevator's less likely to be exactly where you want it, when you want it. Another angle is observer bias. We notice annoying situations more than convenient ones. When the elevator arrives perfectly on our floor traveling the correct direction, we don't dwell on it. We just step in and go. But when it's the opposite, we get frustrated and it sticks in our memory, reinforcing the belief that it always goes the wrong way. Mathematically, some versions of the elevator paradox deal with random arrivals and average waiting times, showing that in many random systems, like waiting for a bus or elevator, inefficiencies are more noticeable. In everyday terms, the elevator paradox reminds us that our perception can exaggerate inconveniences. Sometimes the world isn't as unfair as it seems. We just remember the irritating moments more vividly than the smooth ones. By recognizing this, we might stay a bit calmer the next time we see the elevator heading the opposite way. The hedgehog's dilemma. Picture a cold winter night. Two hedgehogs want to share body warmth by huddling together. Yet as soon as they get close, their quills prick each other, causing pain. If they separate to avoid the pain, they lose the benefit of warmth. They're stuck in a dilemma: risk getting hurt to stay warm, or keep distance and remain cold. This metaphor, known as the hedgehog's dilemma, describes the challenges of human relationships. We long for intimacy and closeness, but the closer we get, the more vulnerable we become to being hurt, whether by misunderstandings, rejection, or betrayal. On the other hand, if we keep people at arm's length, we protect ourselves but feel lonely or isolated. The paradox appears in everyday life. Consider someone who's been hurt in past friendships. They're eager to make new connections, but hesitate to open up again. If they remain guarded, no one can truly know them, and closeness is impossible. If they open up too quickly, they risk more pain. Psychologists use the hedgehog's dilemma to explain emotional boundaries and the difficulties of balancing closeness with independence. It shows that hurt is almost inevitable in relationships, but so is the potential for comfort and support. The art is learning to set healthy limits, close enough to care, yet not so close that quills dig deep. Ultimately, the hedgehog's dilemma reminds us that human connection requires vulnerability. There's no perfect distance that guarantees warmth without risk. Each of us must navigate how close we dare to get, knowing pain might be part of the price we pay for genuine companionship and love. The Doomsday Argument. Imagine you're handed a random number representing your birth order among all humans who will ever exist. Say, you're the 80 billionth person. The Doomsday Argument suggests that if your number is relatively high, it implies there aren't many people left to be born, hinting that humanity might be closer to its end than we think. Proposed by astrophysicist Brandon Carter and popularized by philosopher John Leslie, the argument relies on Bayesian reasoning. If you pick someone at random from the total human timeline, you're more likely to land on a birth rank that's not too early or too late. If you find yourself near the middle of the distribution, then logically, there may not be that many generations to follow. Critics say this is too simplistic. It assumes a uniform distribution of birth ranks and doesn't account for changing birth rates, technology, or the possibility of massive population booms. Others note that we could simply be unlucky to live at a high birth rank, and it doesn't necessarily mean the end is nigh. Yet the doomsday argument challenges our comfort. It makes us reflect on how fragile human existence can be and how easily we might slip into overconfidence about civilization's longevity. It's not a firm prediction that the world will end soon, but a reminder that each of us occupies only one point in a long sequence, and that sequence might not stretch on forever. In practice, many see the argument as motivation to safeguard our future, investing in sustainable technologies, avoiding existential risks, and thinking carefully about how we might shape tomorrow, rather than assuming humanity will just keep going indefinitely. The paradox of enrichment. Imagine a serene lake with a small population of fish. A well-intentioned effort introduces more nutrients, thinking it will boost the food chain and help the fish thrive. At first, populations do grow, but over time they explode to unsustainable levels, then collapse catastrophically, leaving the ecosystem worse off. This scenario captures the paradox of enrichment proposed by ecologist Michael Rosenzweig. It shows how adding resources to an ecosystem can destabilize predator-prey relationships. Instead of a healthy balance, the system swings into extremes, excessive growth followed by a crash. Why does this happen? When prey get abundant food, their numbers spike rapidly. Predators also multiply, thanks to more prey. But once predators become too many, they overconsume the prey, leading to a sharp decline on both sides. The enriched system turns chaotic instead of stable. Beyond lakes and forests, the paradox applies to economic or social systems where unregulated enrichment might lead to bubbles and collapses. Think of speculative markets. Injecting more capital can initially fuel rapid growth, but eventually triggers a burst when the market overshoots reality. The paradox of enrichment reminds us that more isn't always better. Complex systems, whether ecological or financial, depend on balance. Too much of a good thing can upset the delicate equilibrium, creating volatile boom and bust cycles. In real-world ecology, solutions often involve moderation, limiting nutrient runoff, introducing sustainable practices, and understanding the carrying capacity of environments. Likewise, in economics, regulation and prudent policy can help prevent destructive crashes. The paradox highlights that well-intentioned interventions can backfire if they don't consider the dynamics of the whole system. The Great Filter Paradox. Look at the vastness of space and all the planets that could host life. Logically, we might expect alien civilizations to fill the galaxy, yet we see no clear evidence of them. This is Fermi's paradox. One proposed solution is the Great Filter, a crucial barrier or event in the evolution of life that's extremely difficult to pass. Either we've already passed it, or it's still looming ahead. If the filter lies in our past, maybe the emergence of complex cells or intelligent life was so improbable that humans are one of the very few species to cross that threshold. In that case, we might be largely alone in the cosmos, survivors of a near-impossible biological leap. If, however, the filter lies in our future, the concern is that every civilization eventually encounters some catastrophe, be it nuclear war, uncontrolled AI, or cosmic disasters, that prevents it from spreading through the galaxy. If we haven't reached that filter yet, our prospects might be grim. The Great Filter challenges us to consider which obstacles are truly the biggest threats. Are we already in the clear, or are we on course for a universal collapse that no advanced species can avoid? While it sounds bleak, many interpret the Great Filter as a call to responsible stewardship of our planet and technology. If advanced life is rare, we carry a unique responsibility to survive, explore, and protect our small corner of the universe. By proactively addressing existential risks, humanity might dodge the fate that countless hypothetical civilizations before us could not overcome. The St. Petersburg paradox. Imagine a game where you toss a fair coin. If it lands heads on the first toss, you win $2. If it lands heads on the second toss and was tails on the first, you win $4. If heads appears for the first time on the third toss, you win $8, and so forth. In general, the payoff doubles for each additional toss it takes to get your first heads. At first glance, it seems like you could win an infinite amount of money. The expected value of this game, calculated by summing each possible outcome weighted by its probability, also appears infinite. After all, there's a 50% chance to win $2, a 25% chance to win $4, a 12.5% chance to win $8, and so on. Those multiplying probabilities and payoffs add up without bound. Yet most people wouldn't pay a huge sum to play this game. We instinctively feel it's not worth thousands of dollars to enter. This contradiction between infinite expected value and real-world intuition is known as the St. Petersburg paradox. Economists and mathematicians explain this by noting that utility, our subjective value of money, is not strictly linear. Gaining an extra $1,000 means a lot more to someone with $0 than to a billionaire. By using a utility function that accounts for diminishing returns, the paradox dissolves. The game's infinite expected value doesn't translate to infinite useful value in human terms. Ultimately, the St. Petersburg paradox shows that mathematical expectation and human decision-making can diverge, highlighting the importance of risk aversion, utility, and real-world psychology in economic choices. The Linda problem paradox. Meet Linda. She's 31, single, outspoken, and deeply concerned with social justice. As a student, she majored in philosophy and participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Now consider two statements. Linda is a bank teller. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Which statement seems more likely to you? Many people pick option 2 because it fits their image of Linda's personality. She's clearly passionate about social issues, so adding feminist aligns with the description. However, option 1 is actually more likely in strict probability terms. Why? Because a single condition, being a bank teller, has broader possibilities than a conjunction of conditions, bank teller and feminist. Any additional detail reduces the overall probability. This is called the Linda problem, a famous example of the conjunction fallacy studied by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. It reveals how our intuition about narratives can override logical reasoning. We tend to favor coherent stories over raw statistics, leading us to make probability errors. Even when people understand probability in theory, the Linda problem still trips them up. It demonstrates how our brains crave consistency in descriptions, falling back on representativeness rather than pure mathematical logic. By highlighting this cognitive pitfall, the Linda problem reminds us to be cautious when drawing conclusions about the likelihood of complex events. Sometimes our intuitive sense of fitting the story can blind us to the simplest and most probable reality. The two-envelope paradox. You're presented with two sealed envelopes, each containing some amount of money. One envelope has exactly twice as much as the other. You pick one at random but haven't looked inside. Now you wonder, should you switch to the other envelope? A quick reasoning goes like this. The envelope you hold might contain X dollars. The other envelope must have either 2x or x by 2. Each outcome seems equally likely. So, the expected value of switching is 1.25x, which is more than x. Therefore, you might conclude switching is always beneficial. But that logic applies no matter which envelope you first chose. The other envelope can always appear to have double or half, suggesting you should perpetually switch. However, if both envelopes were prepared beforehand, once you pick one, there's no extra advantage in switching. The scenario remains symmetric. This contradiction is the two-envelope paradox. It stems from mixing up conditional probabilities and the prior distribution of the amounts. You can't just assume a 50-50 chance of having half or double the amount without considering how the sums were chosen in the first place. In reality, if you have no additional information, switching doesn't confer any advantage. Both envelopes are equally likely to be the one with double. The two-envelope paradox shows how easily we can be misled by naive, expected value calculations, highlighting the need to carefully account for how outcomes are determined. Non-transitive dice. Imagine you and a friend each have a special 6-sided die. You roll them to see who gets the higher number. But these dice aren't normal. They have numbers arranged in an unusual way. You quickly discover something shocking. Die A often beats die B. Die B often beats die C, yet die C often beats die A. It's a rock-paper-scissors loop with dice. This phenomenon is an example of non-transitive dice. Transitive usually means if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. But here, that logic fails. By cleverly distributing numbers, you create a cycle. Each die is strong against one die and weak against another. Such dice defy our intuition about probability. In normal arithmetic, if 6 is greater than 5 and 5 is greater than 4, it's obvious that 6 is greater than 4. But these dice ignore that logic by balancing out the numbers in unexpected ways. For instance, scattering high values across certain faces while combining smaller numbers in a strategic pattern on others. Non-transitive dice illustrate that chance can be manipulated in surprising ways. They have practical implications for game theory and strategic decision-making, showing that even a simple roll-off can involve hidden complexities. Ultimately, non-transitive dice demonstrate that winning strategies aren't always straightforward. If your friend knows which die you pick, they could pick another that's more likely to win. But if you anticipate that, you might pick a different die, leading to a mind game reminiscent of rock, paper, scissors, all with dice that break the usual rules of logic. The missing dollar problem. 3 friends check into a hotel room costing $30. Each person pays $10 for a total of $30. Later, the hotel clerk realizes the room should have cost only $25. He hands $5 to the bellhop to return to the friends. The bellhop, seeing a chance to profit, gives each friend just $1 back, pocketing the remaining $2. Now each friend has paid $9 for a total of $27. Adding the bellhop's $2, that makes $29, $29. Where did the missing dollar go? The trick is in how the numbers are combined. Each friend paying $9 means they paid a total of $27. But the $27 already includes the $2 the bellhop took. So you shouldn't add the $2 to the $27. The actual breakdown is, the friends paid $27. Of that, $27, $25 went to the hotel, and $2 went to the bellhop. $27 is the final amount the friends collectively spent. The misleading phrase, adding the bellhop's $2 to the friends' $27, is an incorrect sum. You don't add money that's already part of the $27. The total paid by the friends is $27, and it's fully accounted for. $25 to the hotel and $2 to the bellhop. There's no missing dollar. This puzzle, often called the missing dollar problem, highlights how framing can create confusion. Rearranging sums in the wrong way makes the math appear to lose $1, but it's all an illusion of incorrect addition. It's a lesson in carefully tracking costs and not double counting the same money. Fitch's paradox of knowability. Imagine someone claiming, all truths are, in principle, knowable. That sounds reasonable. If something is true, you could discover it eventually with enough investigation. Yet Fitch's paradox reveals a startling conclusion. If every truth can be known, then all truths must already be known. How does this happen? Suppose there's a truth that nobody currently knows. If all truths are knowable, then this unknown truth could be discovered. But once it's discovered, it's no longer unknown. Through a bit of logical deduction, you arrive at the counterintuitive idea that no truth can remain unknown. Otherwise, you run into contradictions. Critics argue the paradox hinges on specific assumptions about knowability. Realistically, discovering certain truths could be impossible in practice, even if it's logically feasible. Some truths might be so hidden or complex, like detailed events in the distant past, that humans can't actually confirm them. Nevertheless, Fitch's paradox sparks debate about the nature of knowledge and epistemology. It suggests that claiming every truth is knowable might be too broad or too idealistic, turning a hopeful statement into an absurd conclusion that everyone must know everything eventually. In everyday terms, Fitch's paradox reminds us that big philosophical claims can yield surprising results when pushed to their logical limits. It challenges the assumption that nothing can remain permanently hidden, pointing to the gap between theoretical knowability and real-world discovery. Munchausen trilemma. Imagine trying to prove a statement in mathematics or philosophy. You begin with an argument, but then someone asks for proof of each step. Soon you realize you must either 1. Rely on an infinite chain of justifications, 2. Circle back to your original assumption, or 3. Accept certain foundations as self-evident without proof. This is the Munchausen trilemma, named after the fictional Baron Munchausen, who supposedly pulled himself out of a swamp by his own hair. It highlights the impossibility of a fully self-contained proof. The 3 horns of the trilemma are infinite regress. You can keep proving each statement with another, but never reach a final grounding. Circular reasoning. You eventually rely on the very thing you're trying to prove. Axiomatic assumption. You declare some statements as given truths with no further proof. In mathematics, we often choose the third option. Starting with axioms, we accept as true. In philosophy, the quest for absolute certainty runs into similar problems. Eventually, all reasoning depends on some bedrock assumption or framework. The Munchausen trilemma reminds us that proof has limits. Every system of knowledge must rest on some unproven basis, reuse earlier premises, or spiral into infinite explanation. Far from undermining knowledge, it highlights why clear axioms and well-chosen foundations are crucial. By acknowledging that all systems need a starting point, we can better understand and communicate the core assumptions that underlie our reasoning. The Euthyphro dilemma. In an ancient dialogue by Plato, Socrates meets Euthyphro, who claims to understand what the gods consider pious or good. Socrates poses a question. Is something good because the gods command it, or do the gods command it because it is good? If things are good because the gods command them, it suggests that morality is simply based on divine whim. An action is right only because a deity said so. But that implies if a god suddenly decreed something cruel, it would become good. This feels unsettling, as it divorces morality from reason or compassion. On the other hand, if the gods command something because it is already good, it implies that goodness is independent of any divine being. In that case, we don't really need gods to define morality. We could discover moral truths on our own. That undercuts the notion that moral authority must flow from a higher power. This dilemma, now known as the Euthyphro dilemma, forces theologians and philosophers to address divine command theory and moral realism. Some argue for a third path, suggesting that God's nature is inseparable from goodness, so what God commands is inherently good. Others maintain that moral truths exist independently, and that a divine being endorses those truths rather than inventing them. Ultimately, the Euthyphro dilemma highlights the complexity of ethics and religion. It prompts us to ask where our sense of right and wrong comes from, and whether moral principles have absolute or divine origins, or both. Zeno's arrow paradox. Imagine an arrow in mid-flight. At any single instant of time, the arrow occupies a specific position in space. If it's just occupying a space during that instant, then it's not moving right then. But time is made up of a series of instants. So how does motion ever occur if, in each instant, the arrow isn't moving? This puzzle, called Zeno's arrow, is one of the famous Zeno's paradoxes, challenging our understanding of motion and time. If time is viewed as a sequence of indivisible frames, the arrow appears frozen in each frame. Yet in reality, we see continuous movement. Modern mathematics resolves Zeno's arrow by treating time as infinitely divisible and using calculus to handle rates of change. Even though the arrow occupies a definite position at each instant, the limit of all those positions over an interval shows movement. Velocity is defined via the derivative of position with respect to time, reconciling the paradox logically. Nevertheless, Zeno's arrow remains philosophically intriguing. It questions whether change is an illusion, or if our classical view of time as a flowing river is more accurate than a series of static snapshots. This paradox pushes us to consider whether reality is composed of infinitely many moments, or if time flows smoothly without discrete slices. While mathematics provides a solution in practical terms, Zeno's arrow continues to fascinate anyone pondering how motion emerges from a chain of seemingly motionless moments. The white bear paradox. Try not to think about a white bear. The moment you hear that instruction, it's almost impossible not to picture one. This phenomenon is the white bear paradox, also known as ironic process theory, first studied by psychologist Daniel Wegner. When we deliberately attempt to suppress a thought, our minds seem to do the opposite, focusing on it more. It works like a mental feedback loop. Part of our brain constantly monitors whether we're thinking of the forbidden idea, thus repeatedly reminding us of it. The effort to banish the thought ironically triggers its resurgence. This paradox has everyday implications. People trying not to feel anxious may become hyper-aware of their anxiety. Insomniacs trying not to think about being awake can make sleep even more elusive. Dieters trying not to crave chocolate might fixate on it more than ever. One proposed solution is to acknowledge unwanted thoughts instead of fighting them. By acknowledging the thought, yes, I'm thinking about a white bear, and letting it pass without judgment, you reduce the mental tension. Techniques like mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy embrace this approach, teaching us to gently observe thoughts rather than forcibly banish them. Ultimately, the white bear paradox reminds us of our mind's rebellious streak. Trying too hard not to think something can make it loom larger in consciousness. Rather than waging war against our thoughts, sometimes the best strategy is acceptance, letting them come and go without a battle. The unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Picture an unstoppable force traveling through space. Nothing can slow it, nothing can redirect it, and its momentum is infinite. Now imagine an immovable object, fixed in place with infinite mass or infinite resistance, so it cannot be moved even a fraction of an inch. What happens if these two entities collide? At first glance, it seems like an epic showdown with no logical outcome. If the unstoppable force truly cannot be stopped, it should push the object aside or destroy it. But if the immovable object can't be moved at all, the force should shatter or fail upon impact. The setup demands a contradiction. Neither can yield, yet something must happen at their meeting point. One way to resolve this is to say they can't coexist. An unstoppable force implies a universe where nothing can provide infinite resistance. Conversely, an immovable object implies a universe where no force can be infinite. If both existed, the laws of physics would break down. Another resolution is that the collision could be a category error. These concepts are defined in ways that exclude each other from the same reality. In practice, no real object has truly infinite mass, and no real force is truly infinite in power. The paradox serves as a thought experiment about absolute extremes that can't logically coexist. It reminds us that in a finite universe governed by consistent physical laws, the notion of infinite resistance meeting infinite momentum is more philosophical puzzle than physical possibility. The double-slit experiment. Picture a simple setup. A beam of light is aimed at a barrier with two narrow slits, behind which is a screen capturing the pattern. We might expect two bright lines corresponding to the two slits. Instead, we see an interference pattern of multiple bright and dark bands, indicating that light behaves like a wave. Each slit's wavefront interacts with the others. But here's where it gets strange. If you place detectors at the slits to see which slit each photon goes through, the interference pattern disappears, and you get just two main bands. It's as if observing the photon's path forces it to behave like a particle, removing the wave-like interference. Stop observing, and the interference pattern returns. This is the essence of the double-slit experiment, often called the cornerstone of quantum mechanics. It challenges our classical intuition by showing that light, and even electrons, atoms, or molecules, can act as both waves and particles. The mere act of measurement, gaining information about the path, changes the outcome. Scientists explain this via the quantum notion of wave function collapse. Before measurement, a photon is described by a probability wave that goes through both slits simultaneously. Once measured, the wave function collapses to a single path. While the math of quantum mechanics predicts these results accurately, the underlying why remains philosophically elusive. The double-slit experiment highlights the mystery of observation in quantum physics, proving that how we measure reality can directly alter what we observe, a revelation that still fascinates and puzzles physicists today. The bystander effect. Imagine a busy street where someone suddenly collapses. Dozens of people walk by, yet many hesitate to help. Why? The bystander effect. The more people who witness an emergency, the less likely any one individual is to intervene. It sounds counterintuitive. You'd think more onlookers would mean more help. But in reality, responsibility feels spread out among everyone present. Social psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latani studied this after the infamous 1964 murder of Kitty Genovese, where multiple neighbors heard her screams but no one promptly called the police. They coined the term diffusion of responsibility. When a group is large, each person assumes someone else will take action. People also look around, seeing that others aren't reacting, and conclude maybe it's not a real emergency, or they fear overreacting. The bystander effect isn't about callousness. Often it's a form of social confusion or self-doubt. In smaller groups, people feel personally responsible, so they're more likely to act. In bigger crowds, it's easier to remain passive, thinking, surely someone else will do something. Overcoming the bystander effect involves taking personal initiative. If you see an emergency, it helps to single out an individual. You, in the red shirt, please call 911, so they know they're needed. Awareness of the phenomenon can also encourage people to trust their instincts and help anyway. Ultimately, the bystander effect highlights a paradox of human nature. We can be empathetic, yet the larger the group, the more our collective compassion can stall without deliberate action. The Trojan liar paradox. The liar paradox typically goes, this statement is false. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. Now imagine a Trojan twist. A Trojan prisoner writes on one side of a tablet. One statement on the other side of this tablet is true. On the reverse, he writes, the statement on the other side of this tablet is false. At first, this feels like a straightforward contradiction, reminiscent of the standard liar puzzle. If the statement on side A is true, then the statement on side B must be false, or vice versa. But each side refers to the other side's truth value, creating a logical loop. Why is this intriguing? The Trojan liar paradox introduces self-reference across two different statements rather than one. It's still the same logical bind. Each side can't be true unless the other side is false, yet it also can't be false unless the other side is true, leading to a circular puzzle. Philosophers highlight these self-referential paradoxes to show inherent limits in classical logic when dealing with statements that talk about their own truth value. Solutions range from paraconsistent logics, allowing contradictions, to limiting statements that can reference themselves. Others argue we should treat such sentences as meaningless or outside standard truth frameworks. The Trojan liar paradox reminds us that language can outwit itself. By carefully constructing statements that refer back to each other, we create loops that break the usual true or false rules, pointing to the complexities at the boundary of logic and language. The paradox of thrift. Imagine a community in economic trouble. Each household decides to save more to build a financial cushion. At first, this seems sensible and prudent, but when everyone cuts spending simultaneously, businesses see fewer sales, leading to layoffs and less income in the community. Ultimately, saving becomes harder for everyone because the overall economy shrinks. This is the paradox of thrift, famously discussed by economist John Maynard Keynes. It highlights a situation where good behavior at the individual level, saving money, can cause negative consequences for the collective. Lower spending reduces demand for goods and services, which in turn can deepen a recession. In a normal scenario, saving is beneficial. But in an economic downturn, if every person hoards cash rather than spending or investing, it can stall the engine of growth, consumer demand. As businesses earn less, they might cut wages or workers, further reducing disposable income in a vicious cycle. Keynes suggested that during severe recessions, government intervention, like public works or stimulus, could help break this downward spiral, boosting collective income and eventually allowing households to save more comfortably. Critics worry about government debt and the risk of inflation, so the debate continues among economists. The paradox of thrift serves as a reminder that individual rational actions may yield irrational group outcomes. In complex systems like an economy, what seems prudent for one person can be self-defeating if everyone does it, illustrating the intricate balance between private decisions and public well-being. Thomson's lamp. Imagine a lamp that can be switched on or off infinitely fast. At time t=0, the lamp is off. After half a minute, you switch it on. After another quarter minute, you switch it off again. Then after an eighth minute, on again, and so on. Each interval, half the previous one. By the time 1 full minute has passed, you flip the switch infinitely many times. The paradox asks, is the lamp on or off at that 1 minute mark? Each flip seems well defined in its own time slot, but because you've performed infinitely many actions in a finite span, the result is unclear. One might argue it must be off, since every on is followed by an off, but you can also say it must be on, for every off is eventually followed by an on. Some even say the question has no meaningful answer. The sequence doesn't converge to a single state. Philosopher James F. Thomson introduced this thought experiment to highlight problems with performing an infinite number of tasks in finite time. It challenges our understanding of continuity, time, and the nature of infinite processes. Modern mathematics deals with limits, but applying a limit to a physical switch can lead to confusion. Does reality even allow infinite flips in finite time? Thomson's lamp remains a classic puzzle for illustrating how infinity can trip up our everyday logic. It reminds us that what seems straightforward, flipping a switch, might become strangely paradoxical when we push the concept into the realm of the infinitely small. The Molyneux problem. In 1688, philosopher William Molyneux posed a question to John Locke. If a person blind from birth learns to distinguish a cube from a sphere by touch alone, then suddenly gains sight, would they recognize which shape is which just by looking at them? Before seeing, the person knows how each object feels, edges, corners, smooth surfaces, yet has never tied those tactile impressions to visual images. Once vision is restored, do they have to learn to match what they see to what they felt, or is the knowledge immediate? This is the Molyneux problem, a philosophical puzzle about how our senses interact to create perception. Historically, many believed the answer was no. The newly sighted person would not immediately recognize the shapes. They would need time to connect the visual data with their tactile experiences. Others argued that perhaps the mind could instantly unify these perceptions. Modern science has gained insight through neuroscience and cases of recovered sight. Generally, people who regain vision after a lifetime of blindness need practice to link objects they previously knew by touch alone with their newly acquired visual impressions. The shapes on a retina don't automatically correspond to the tactile memory. The Molyneux problem highlights questions about innate knowledge, the interplay of senses, and whether certain cognitive processes are hardwired or learned. It underscores how perception isn't just seeing or touching, it's interpreting signals in the brain, and that interpretation can require experience. Russell's teapot. Imagine a tiny china teapot orbiting the sun somewhere between Earth and Mars. It's so small and so far away that it's impossible to detect with our best telescopes. Philosopher Bertrand Russell proposed this scenario to illustrate a point about burden of proof in religious or metaphysical claims. If someone asserts the teapot is there, it shouldn't be everyone else's job to disprove it. Russell argued that saying, "You can't prove me wrong, so I must be right," is a weak stance. In many debates about the existence of gods, spirits, or other unseen forces, one side might insist that because others can't disprove their claim, it must be valid. Russell's teapot flips that logic on its head. The inability to disprove something doesn't automatically lend credibility to its truth. This idea has broader implications. Think of conspiracy theories or extraordinary scientific claims. They sometimes rely on the argument, "You can't show this isn't the case." Russell reminds us that extraordinary claims should come with extraordinary evidence. It's not enough to rely on the difficulty of disproving a statement. In essence, Russell's teapot is about rational skepticism. It encourages us to weigh claims proportionally to the evidence provided, rather than accept them merely because they can't be refuted. While we can't prove the absence of an invisible teapot in space, that doesn't mean we should believe it's real. It highlights how crucial burden of proof is when exploring the boundaries of knowledge and belief. The halting problem. Proposed by Alan Turing, the halting problem asks, can we build a program, call it H, that reads another program's instructions and input, then infallibly decides whether that program will halt, finish running, or run forever? Turing proved the answer is no. If such a perfect detector existed, we could exploit it to create a logical contradiction. Imagine writing a program that calls H on itself. If H predicts this program halts, the program purposely enters an infinite loop. If H predicts this program loops forever, the program halts immediately. This paradoxical design means no algorithm can consistently guess correctly in every case. The halting problem underscores a fundamental limit in computation. Not every question about program behavior is algorithmically solvable. We can't always predict if a piece of code will terminate. This has real-world implications. For instance, detecting infinite loops or guaranteeing a program's reliability can be partly done with heuristics, but there's no universal foolproof method. In practice, Turing's result laid groundwork for understanding decidability and computability. It also paved the way for deeper exploration into how computers simulate logic, culminating in the concept of Turing machines, the basis for modern computational theory. Ultimately, the halting problem reveals a theoretical boundary in computer science. While computers are powerful, they're not omniscient. Some questions about their own processes lie beyond the scope of any algorithm to answer with absolute certainty. The faint young sun paradox. Billions of years ago, when life was just emerging, the sun was about 30% dimmer than it is today. If that's true, Earth should have been a frozen snowball, too cold for liquid water and early life to flourish. Yet geological evidence shows a relatively warm planet, with oceans teeming with primitive organisms. How did Earth stay warm under a fainter sun? This contradiction is called the faint young sun paradox. Scientists propose various explanations. One is that Earth's atmosphere then had much higher greenhouse gas levels, like carbon dioxide or methane, trapping heat to compensate for the weaker sunlight. Another idea points to geological and biological feedback loops, where volcanic activity or microbial life continuously adjusted greenhouse gases, maintaining a delicate balance. Some also suggest Earth's albedo, reflectivity, could have been different, perhaps with fewer clouds or less land area, allowing more solar energy to be absorbed. Over time, as the sun brightened, planetary feedback mechanisms evolved to reduce greenhouse gases, preventing a runaway greenhouse effect. The faint young sun paradox highlights the complexity of climate regulation and how life and geology could co-evolve to create stable conditions. It's a reminder that Earth's habitability isn't just about solar output. It's about interacting systems, atmosphere, oceans, volcanic processes, and life forms that constantly reshape our planet's climate. By investigating this ancient puzzle, scientists learn how Earth remained livable despite a dimmer sun, and glean insights into the habitability of other worlds orbiting stars at different stages of brightness. The drinker paradox. Imagine a busy bar where at least one person is currently drinking. The drinker paradox, attributed to logician Raymond Smullyan, states, "In any non-empty bar, there must be someone such that if that person is drinking, then everyone in the bar is drinking." How can that be true? It seems absurd to say one person's drink implies everyone else's. Yet there's a clever logical proof. If everyone is drinking, the paradox is trivially satisfied by any individual. If not everyone is drinking, then at least one person is not drinking. Take that non-drinker as your special individual. By definition, this person is not drinking. But the statement, if this person is drinking, then everyone is drinking, still holds true, because the condition, this person is drinking, is false, and a false condition makes the implication vacuously true. In simpler terms, the paradox exploits how an implication works in classical logic. If the if part is false, the whole statement is considered true no matter what follows. It's a good reminder that formal logic can produce counterintuitive results when we apply it to everyday scenarios. Though it sounds strange, the drinker paradox is valid in standard logical systems. Brace's paradox. Think of a city with roads connecting neighborhoods. One day, planners add a new shortcut, hoping to ease traffic. Surprisingly, travel times for everyone get worse. This counterintuitive outcome is known as Brace's paradox. The paradox arises because drivers act individually and pick what they see as the quickest route. With the new road, more drivers crowd onto what initially appears the best path. Yet this influx causes congestion, making that shortcut slower than before. In some cases, closing that new road can restore better flow for everyone, even if it removes an extra travel option. Brace's paradox shows that more choices don't always produce better results when individual rationality clashes with the common good. Each driver's self-interested decision can collectively lead to worse traffic. City planners have seen real-world examples. Building extra roads or lanes sometimes worsens congestion. This paradox highlights the complexity of network systems, from highways to the internet, where well-meaning additions may degrade overall performance. It underscores the importance of holistic thinking in design. Sometimes less is more. Solutions might include tolls, traffic signals, or alternate route incentives to balance flow, proving that managing human behavior is often as crucial as building more infrastructure. The gambler's fallacy. Imagine you're at a roulette table and the ball has landed on red for 6 spins in a row. Many people think, surely black is due next. They place big bets on black, believing the unbroken streak can't last forever. Yet statistically, the chance of red or black remains the same each spin, about 50%, ignoring the green zero. This mistaken belief is the gambler's fallacy, the false idea that past events affect future probabilities in a sequence of independent trials. The classic example is flipping a fair coin. If it lands heads 5 times in a row, we often think tails is due. In reality, each flip is a separate event with a 50-50 chance. The gambler's fallacy arises from our intuitive sense that probability should balance out. We expect streaks to end and outcomes to revert to the mean. While long streaks are indeed less common, once a streak happens, there's no force that ensures the next result will break it. Recognizing the gambler's fallacy is crucial in casinos, lotteries, and everyday decisions. By remembering that independent events remain independent, we avoid misplacing our faith in due results. And we keep our judgments a bit more rational. Bertrand's box paradox. You have 3 boxes. Box A, 2 gold coins. Box B, 2 silver coins. Box C, 1 gold coin plus 1 silver coin. All boxes are closed. You randomly pick a box, then randomly draw 1 coin from it. The coin is gold. What's the probability that the other coin in the same box is also gold? At first, you might think there's a 50-50 chance. After all, you drew a gold coin, so maybe you have box A or box C. But analyzing the scenarios reveals a twist. There are 3 possible gold coins to draw. The first gold coin from box A, the second gold coin from box A, the single gold coin from box C. The draws from box A represent 2 of those possibilities, while the draw from box C is 1. Thus, 2 out of the 3 gold coins come from the box with both coins gold. Therefore, the probability that you're in box A, and thus the second coin is gold, is 2/3. Known as Bertrand's box paradox, or sometimes a variation of the 2-coin puzzle, this puzzle highlights how carefully enumerating possibilities can yield surprising results. It also mirrors the logic of more famous puzzles like the Monty Hall problem. Intuition alone isn't always reliable when probabilities are in play. Friedman's paradox. Imagine a scientist running a large number of statistical tests in search of any significant effect, perhaps checking dozens of possible correlations in a data set. Some results might pop up as significant by chance, simply because enough tests were done. Friedman's paradox highlights that if you run numerous regressions or hypothesis tests without proper adjustments, you may discover correlations that are merely random noise. In essence, Friedman's paradox exposes how the scientific method can break down when researchers hunt for results in an unstructured way. With many variables and countless ways to combine them, it's easy to find patterns that look meaningful but don't hold under scrutiny. This is sometimes called p-hacking, tweaking analyses to yield statistically significant results. Solutions involve statistical corrections like Bonferroni adjustments or false discovery rate controls, ensuring results aren't simply flukes. Pre-registering studies and limiting the number of hypotheses tested can also help maintain integrity. Friedman's paradox is a reminder that data mining must be approached with caution. While modern computing power encourages us to explore big data sets, we must separate true signals from random coincidences. Otherwise, we risk celebrating findings that vanish upon replication, a cautionary tale for scientists and data analysts alike. Polchinski's paradox. Physicist Joseph Polchinski proposed a time travel thought experiment that challenges our understanding of causality. Imagine a billiard table connected to a wormhole where a ball can travel back in time. The setup is arranged so that when the ball rolls toward the wormhole, it emerges from the past just in time to collide with its earlier self, knocking it off course before it ever enters the wormhole. This seems to create a self-contradiction. If the ball is successfully knocked away, it never takes the path that sent it back to collide with itself in the first place. Yet if it's never knocked away, how did the collision occur? Polchinski's paradox suggests that closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, might be impossible under conventional physics, or at least require constraints preventing such logical knots. Some physicists posit the universe self-consistently arranges events so that paradoxical collisions can't happen. Others propose multiple timelines where collisions create branching realities, avoiding direct contradiction. Though highly theoretical, Polchinski's paradox illustrates why time travel stirs deep debates in physics and philosophy. It highlights the tension between determinism, free will, and the possibility that nature forbids any scenario that breaks causality. The quantum Cheshire cat. In Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, the Cheshire cat can vanish until only its grin remains. Physicists drew inspiration from this image when proposing the quantum Cheshire cat effect, an experiment suggesting that a particle can be separated from one of its properties, like a photon traveling one way while its polarization or spin is detected elsewhere. The idea emerges from quantum interference setups, where particles seem to take multiple paths at once. By carefully designing measurements, researchers claim they can detect the presence of, say, a neutron spin in one arm of an interferometer, while the neutron itself seems to pass through another arm. It's as if the cat, the neutron, and its grin, the spin, have split apart. Skeptics argue that interpreting the effect as a literal disembodiment of properties might be misleading, stressing that the math of quantum mechanics can be consistent without implying a physical split. Yet proponents say it challenges us to rethink localization, where exactly a property like spin resides. Whether or not the grin truly floats free, the quantum Cheshire cat scenario highlights the strangeness of quantum systems, where classical notions of object and property can be surprisingly elusive. The quantum pigeonhole principle. Classically, the pigeonhole principle states that if you put 3 pigeons into 2 holes, at least one hole must contain 2 pigeons. But quantum mechanics can defy our expectations. In a 2014 proposal, researchers showed that quantum systems could distribute pigeons, particles, in such a way that no hole appears to hold more than one particle, even though there are more particles than boxes. This quantum pigeonhole principle relies on how measurements disturb quantum states. Instead of discovering that a hole has two particles, the act of measuring a hole's contents collapses the wave function, effectively changing the overall distribution. Each measurement might reveal just one pigeon per hole, but the system as a whole still contains more particles than holes. Critics note that the result hinges on a specific definition of occupation and how outcomes are observed. Nonetheless, it underscores the radical difference between classical reasoning and quantum reality. Much like other quantum paradoxes, it doesn't literally mean two particles vanish. Rather, interference and entanglement create outcomes that defy classical pigeonhole logic. The quantum pigeonhole principle highlights how simply counting in quantum mechanics becomes tricky once superposition and measurement effects come into play, reminding us that intuition from everyday life can crumble in the quantum realm. Kafka's toxin puzzle. Philosopher Gregory Kafka imagined a scenario where a wealthy eccentric promises you $1 million if at midnight you form the genuine intention to drink a harmless but unpleasant toxin the next day. You don't have to actually drink it, just sincerely plan to. Once you form that true intention at midnight, you receive the money immediately, and nothing compels you to follow through. But if you don't end up drinking, was your original intention ever genuine? This is Kafka's toxin puzzle. The twist lies in the difference between intentions and actions. You could rationalize that once you get the million, there's no benefit in drinking the toxin. But not drinking implies your intent wasn't truly sincere at midnight. If your mind is cunning enough to foresee that you won't drink, can you ever fully form the required intention? The puzzle challenges the idea that you can will yourself into a state of mind that you know you'll abandon later. It ties into rational choice theory, highlighting how intentions can unravel when future incentives change. Some argue you can't simply decide to have a belief or resolve that you know you'll discard. Others claim you might self-bind with moral or psychological constraints to maintain sincerity. Either way, Kafka's toxin puzzle shows how tricky intentions and self-knowledge can be once short-term and long-term incentives conflict. The diamond water paradox. Why is water, essential for life, often cheaper than diamonds, which are comparatively useless for survival? This classic economic puzzle is the diamond water paradox, credited to thinkers like Adam Smith. It highlights the difference between total value and marginal value. In everyday terms, water's total value is enormous. We can't live without it, but it's usually abundant. That abundance makes the additional, marginal unit of water cheap. Diamonds, while non-essential, are rare. Each additional diamond is costly to acquire. Hence, the marginal value of diamonds remains high, driving up prices. The paradox helps us see that prices reflect marginal utility, the value of the next unit, rather than how crucial something is overall. Even though we desperately need water, we typically have plenty, so one more glass doesn't add much to our well-being. Diamonds, being scarce, have a steep curve of demand against supply, resulting in higher prices. In modern economics, the diamond water paradox guides us to distinguish between total utility, how vital something is in sum, and marginal utility, the value of one extra unit. It's a foundational lesson in how markets assign worth, revealing that scarcity and utility at the margin often trump absolute importance. Mary's room. Philosopher Frank Jackson devised a thought experiment about a brilliant scientist named Mary, who has lived her entire life in a black and white room. Mary knows everything about color in a scientific sense, wavelengths, neurology, and all physical facts. One day, she leaves the room and sees color, say, red, for the first time. Does she learn something new? The puzzle, often called Mary's room or the knowledge argument, questions whether physical facts alone capture the experience of seeing color. If Mary acquires new knowledge, what red looks like, it implies that qualia, subjective experiences, transcend physical information. On the other hand, Some philosophers argue that Mary doesn't really learn anything new. She just gains a new perspective on facts she already knew. Mary's room challenges physicalism, the view that everything can be explained by physical science. It suggests there may be non-physical aspects to consciousness, like the raw feel of color. Critics counter that an experience is simply reorganizing known data in the brain. Whichever side you take, Mary's room reveals how hard it is to explain consciousness in purely scientific terms. It forces us to ask, can complete physical knowledge ever replace the lived experience of reality? The Easterlin paradox. In economics, you might assume that as average incomes rise, people become happier. But Richard Easterlin discovered something curious. Beyond a certain point, rising national wealth doesn't necessarily lead to greater overall life satisfaction. This phenomenon, called the Easterlin paradox, suggests that while richer countries tend to have happier populations than very poor ones, within a single country, long-term economic growth hasn't always translated into sustained increases in happiness. Why might this happen? One explanation is relative income. People compare themselves to those around them. As everyone grows richer, your own gains may not feel meaningful if your neighbor's gains match or exceed yours. Another factor is adaptation. We quickly get used to better living conditions, and our expectations rise. Over time, the initial boost in happiness from higher income fades. Critics argue that more recent data shows a clearer connection between economic growth and life satisfaction, suggesting the paradox might be less universal than first thought. Still, it challenges the belief that GDP growth alone guarantees social well-being. The Easterlin paradox underscores that happiness is influenced by psychological and social factors, not just the size of our bank accounts. Aristotle's wheel paradox. Visualize a wheel with two concentric circles, an outer rim and a smaller inner rim attached to the same axle. As the wheel rolls along a flat surface for one full rotation, you'd expect the outer rim, being larger, to cover more ground than the inner rim. Yet, if both rims are fixed together, each completes exactly one turn. How do they travel different distances if they move in tandem? This is Aristotle's wheel paradox, which questions how a single rotation can yield multiple circumferences. It plays on the idea that the wheel's points have different radii, yet rotate around the same axis in one revolution. In modern terms, we resolve this by recognizing that when the outer rim rolls on the ground, each point of contact is momentarily at rest relative to the surface. The inner rim, however, can't simply trace a perfect circle on the ground. The paradox highlights how rolling motion isn't as straightforward as a single circle unrolling on a line. When wheels of different radii are rigidly connected, the smaller circle can't trace an independent path of the same length. Aristotle's wheel reminds us that visual intuition can be misleading if we overlook the constraints of rigid motion and the subtle interplay of contact points on a rolling object. The repugnant conclusion. Imagine trying to design the ideal population. Would you prefer a world of billions of people each living just barely satisfactory lives, or a smaller population enjoying very high quality of life? The repugnant conclusion, introduced by philosopher Derek Parfit, suggests that under certain utilitarian or consequentialist frameworks, having more total happiness, even if each individual's life is hardly fulfilling, could be seen as better than having fewer but happier individuals. This offends many intuitions. Why accept a massive population with minimal well-being when you could have fewer people thriving? Yet purely aggregate-based moral views can lead to that repugnant outcome. They weigh some total happiness more heavily than average happiness. If each new life, no matter how marginally worthwhile, adds to the overall total good, then a huge number of just okay lives might surpass a smaller number of excellent lives. Philosophers have tried various fixes, focusing on average utility, thresholds of well-being, or different value theories. But each alternative can create new paradoxes. The repugnant conclusion challenges us to refine how we measure human welfare and weigh quantity against quality. It's a reminder that even well-intentioned ethical theories can produce uncomfortable implications when we push them to logical extremes. Schelling's segregation model. Economist Thomas Schelling devised a simple simulation. Imagine a grid where each cell represents a house, occupied by either a red or blue family. Each family wants at least some neighbors of its own color, though not necessarily all. Even with mild preferences for living among similar neighbors, Schelling's model often produces highly segregated neighborhoods. Why is this a paradox? You might expect moderate preferences to yield a mixed community, yet each family's small, individual decisions, like moving away if too few neighbors share their color, cumulatively lead to significant clustering of like groups. This doesn't require overt racism or strong bias, just a slight tendency to feel uncomfortable if surrounded by mostly others. Schelling's segregation model demonstrates how micro-level preferences can produce macro-level patterns that surprise us. People might say they want diversity, but their small actions, switching neighborhoods if they feel in the minority, reinforce an overall separation. City maps can become sharply divided even without explicit discriminatory policies. The paradox underscores the power of individual choices interacting in a system. It's a cornerstone in understanding how seemingly benign preferences still shape housing patterns, schooling demographics, and social circles, challenging the notion that large-scale segregation requires strong prejudice. The brain in a vat. Imagine you wake up one day to discover you're merely a brain in a vat, with electrodes delivering signals that simulate a normal life. Every sight, sound, and sensation feels real, yet it's all just electrical impulses arranged by a powerful computer. How could you prove otherwise? This scenario, sometimes called the brain in a vat paradox, updates René Descartes' evil demon argument and foreshadows modern matrix-like simulations. It questions whether external reality is verifiable or if we could be deceived at every turn. If all your experiences are mere signals, any test you devise could itself be part of the illusion. Philosophers use this thought experiment to explore skepticism, the idea that certain knowledge about the external world might be impossible. Even if it's an unlikely hypothesis, brain in a vat logic suggests that no direct sensory evidence can fully disprove it. We rely on basic assumptions, that our senses mostly reflect an external shared reality, without a definitive logical proof. In practical terms, the brain in a vat paradox underscores how perception and belief intertwine. It forces us to reflect on what counts as evidence and whether experience alone can guarantee truth. We live as though we're not brains in vats, but this puzzle reminds us just how fragile our epistemic foundations can be. The Ellsberg paradox. Economist Daniel Ellsberg presented a choice between two jars of colored balls, say, red and blue. In jar A, the ratio of red to blue is known, 50 to 50 for example. In jar B, the ratio is unknown, so it could be 100% red, 100% blue, or anything in between. When asked to bet on drawing a red ball, many people pick jar A, favoring known odds over ambiguous ones, even though the unknown jar could, in principle, offer a better chance. This is the Ellsberg paradox, revealing ambiguity, aversion. People often prefer a known probability to an uncertain one, even when mathematical expectation might be the same or higher in the uncertain scenario. Classical decision theory, like expected utility, says you should weigh probabilities consistently. But Ellsberg showed that real human decisions don't follow this model. They reflect psychological discomfort with incomplete information. The paradox challenges rational choice assumptions, suggesting that uncertainty isn't just another probability to plug into equations. It has its own emotional or cognitive weight. Modern behavioral economics explores how ambiguity aversion shapes finance, insurance, and everyday decisions. Ellsberg's insight was that the fear of the unknown can override pure logic, illustrating the gap between theoretical rationality and real human behavior. The paradox of the plankton. In a lake or ocean, a limited set of resources should theoretically allow only a few species of plankton to survive. Yet in reality, scientists observe hundreds of plankton species coexisting in the same waters. This discrepancy between expectations and reality is known as the paradox of the plankton. Classical ecological theory suggests that when organisms compete for identical resources, competitive exclusion will occur. One species outcompetes the others. So why do plankton defy this principle? Possible explanations include environmental fluctuations, varying predation, or microhabitats that subtly partition resources. Some species might thrive under specific temperature or nutrient conditions, and those conditions shift frequently in aquatic environments. Another angle involves complex interactions among species. If predators keep dominant plankton in check, lesser species gain a foothold. Additionally, different plankton can use slightly different niches of the light spectrum or nutrient availability. These small differences allow them to coexist more peacefully than expected. Ultimately, the paradox of the plankton underscores the intricacy of real ecosystems. It's a reminder that nature often finds more ways to balance life than we might predict from simplified models, highlighting biodiversity's resilience and the subtle forces that sustain it. The privacy paradox. In surveys, people routinely declare that privacy is vital. They don't want their personal data exposed. Yet in practice, many of us willingly share personal details on social media, give apps access to our contacts, and click accept on lengthy terms without reading them. This gap between stated beliefs and actual behavior is known as the privacy paradox. Psychologists suggest that convenience and social pressure often override privacy concerns. The fear of missing out, or the lure of personalized features, can eclipse the abstract risk of data misuse. Additionally, the potential harms, like identity theft or targeted advertising, feel remote compared to immediate benefits. So many individuals rationalize the trade-off. Some argue that modern society normalizes data sharing, making it socially and economically beneficial to disclose more than we otherwise would. Others highlight a lack of transparent control. Even if we want to protect our data, platforms can make it complicated to manage preferences or see what's really collected. The privacy paradox is a wake-up call for policymakers and tech companies. If consumers truly value privacy, why are they so quick to trade it for convenience? Understanding this mismatch can guide better user experiences, more ethical data policies, and technology designed to empower users rather than exploit them. Cantor's paradox. Georg Cantor revolutionized mathematics by showing that infinite sets come in different sizes, cardinalities. But Cantor also discovered a puzzle. Consider the set of all sets. It should have the greatest possible cardinality. Yet if you take the power set of any set, the set of all its subsets, Cantor proved the power set must be strictly larger than the original set. If the set of all sets exists, its power set would be bigger, creating a logical contradiction. This is Cantor's paradox. It implies that talking about the set of all sets is problematic in standard set theory. It leads to infinite regress, reminiscent of Russell's paradox. Mathematicians resolve this by carefully restricting the formation of sets. Modern axiomatic systems like Zermelo-Fraenkel forbid a universal set containing itself as a subset. Instead, sets exist in hierarchical stages, preventing one all-encompassing set. Cantor's paradox highlights the strangeness of infinity and how naive assumptions about collections of everything can yield contradictions. By restricting how sets are built, mathematicians preserve consistency. The puzzle underscores that our intuitions about size, infinity, and totality don't always translate seamlessly into formal logic, and that a bit of caution is needed when dealing with the infinite.